Is that it? How did I manage that? I got it. Okay, now at least I won't annoy myself to death. And we can all get into this. I'll have to definitely edit that out if I do a VOD. Okay.
The Eastern Bloc, and so on, as well as the legacy of capital C communist movements within the United States and Western Europe, and so on. So I think there's no dispute about the fact that communism does have to refer to the thing that actually propped the name into relevance and significance in the first place. And to me, when you begin from there, you have to have a very honest and sober assessment of the record.
I I think it's good to look historically at where communism came from, and there's a lot to learn from that. But everything has to evolve. Modern day communism probably wouldn't be something even Marx would have anticipated, you know. He never would have thought we had smartphones and AI.
In the facts at hand. Now, the experience of communism was obviously very bloody. It was obviously something that was fraught with catastrophes, to say the least, economic catastrophes, famines, moments of political terror, and so on and so on. But we should have a more broader investigation and criticism of whether this is specifically because of communism rather than a feature of modernity as such, because the modernization of, let's say, even the Western capitalist countries and the world at large fits the same pattern that we saw, if not far worse, actually, I would argue, in the case of communism. The prerequisites to the agricultural and industrial modernization of the non-communist world required an immense level of famines, social instability, terror, unrest, colonialism, slavery, and so on in the New World, genocide. These are all things that aren't that can't be brushed to the side when we're evaluating how modernization takes place historically. So to me, you have to place communism within that context of this question of pre-modern and largely agrarian societies confronting and trying to persevere through this challenge of modernity. And to me, modernity, specifically in the form of agricultural modernization, somehow historically inevitably leads to this kind of chaos and uncertainty in the way food is produced and in the way the foundation of economies, agricultures, is preserved, right? So this is obviously something fraught with several, small mistakes can lead to catastrophic outcomes. But at the very least, we can say that these mistakes were on record, things that communist states learned from after they were made, very quickly, I should add. And when you don't only look at the negatives that are mostly mass publicized as a result of Cold War anti-communist propaganda and elsewhere, you have to also have a fair and sober assessment of the overwhelming achievements of communist parties in leading their respective peoples to a position, a social position far superior to than before, whether in the realm of literacy, acculturation, medicine,
Okay,
access to a
dude.
bare minimum of a
This
standard of
guy
living, a basic dignified.
Infrared never stops, like he doesn't breathe when he talks. It's insane. So, while I can agree that transitory eras of history tend to be bloody and violent, and I don't agree with him that communism is at fault for that. I believe communism is a rebellion to that, in such a way that, you know, most communist attempts, true communist attempts, have been stamped out by capitalism because capitalism seeks only profits, and communism seeks the internal profit of happiness on an individual and societal level. Anyway, moving
Means
on.
of livelihood, a kind of guarantee of a job, so on and so on. Obviously, this came to a certain limit and crisis in the 1970s, where this primary standard of living was no longer enough to support the wants and desires and aspirations of the peoples in communist states. But nonetheless, I think we can retrace and reevaluate the original significance of communism in order to now address and put into a new light the challenges that we now face today, which our current liberal order seems to be unable to deal with. We're facing a fourth industrial revolution. We're facing an economic transition not dissimilar to the one that communists were addressing, namely the one from pre-modern agrarian societies to industrial societies. Now we're in a situation of industrial societies transitioning into an era of smart cities and and more internet-based economy and more kind of decentralization. And I think that communism has a newfound significance in this regard. So I think I'll just end it there.
You got it. Thank you very much for that opening statement, Infrared. Want to let you know, folks, if it's your first time here at Modern Day Debate, we are thrilled to have you here no matter.
Yes, James is great. I don't know how he stays in the middle so well. Um I I'm pretty sure he's left leaning. I don't really. It doesn't really matter to me. What he does is pretty important, but man, he finds some crazy people.
You can be equal with God, and that's a lie. And feminist communists have that I think
Okay,
of that I run into.
I'm sorry. I've got to
That communists were
rewind.
addressing, namely the one from pre.
Debate. We are thrilled to have you here no matter
I'll
what
let
walk
James
of life you are
finish. He
from.
doesn't talk
And
for long.
we are also thrilled to have here James Hake. Thanks so much
James
for being with
gets
us. The floor
right
is all yours
into
for
the
your opening statement as
BS.
well.
Check
Well,
this
thank you,
out.
and thanks to Haas Infrared for coming on as well. Today was my introduction to Haas and Infrared and what they, or he, I think it's they, believe. I think he's a Marxist Leninist communist. What is interesting to me about him is that he does not appear as rabidly anti-white, anti-Christian, anti-man as the typical communists that I think.
It already starts. It already starts. You can already tell this man is indoctrinated into the belief that just because you're not Christian, you must hate white people. Just because you're not capitalist, you must hate white people. How is this a thing? People don't hate white people, okay? People just hate people like you, James. Get your head out of your ass. Sorry, let's
Think of that I run
continue.
into, I don't know, looking around America, like the Democrats, the Black Lives Matter, Antifa people, the mainstream media types. And I saw a video where he said you can be patriotic and nationalist as well as communist. But my take on communism is that it's atheistic at its root. Like you have to be an atheist to be a good communist was one quote from a famous communist I think I've heard.
One quote from some famous communist I think I heard. What a great citation. This dude gets all his information from his preacher or something. I don't know.
Promoting the insane idea of equality, which is not an ideal, nor is it the truth. The serpent told Eve.
The insane idea of equality. And then he says it's a false ideal. An ideal is something to live up to. There's nothing false about that. We can all try to be equals.
In the Garden of Eden, that you can be equal with God, and that's a lie.
Now he's getting at how dare women, how dare you women for believing that you can be equal to men? We know the Garden of Eden proved that to be false. This dude is a moron, and I'd be surprised if he's ever gotten laid.
And feminist communists have sought to be equal with men, and it's just been a big mess since then. Communism seems to be against men and against nature. Around in America, it has sought to render the men unnecessary.
How is communism against nature? I'm pretty sure that communism is well, traditionally doesn't worry much about nature, but in a more modern sense, what community does for nature, we're growing a much stronger relationship with it because we have to. We're being forced to. If we don't, we're going to kill ourselves. I'm going to rewind and listen to that again because
Atheistic at its root.
I forgot.
Like you have to be an atheist to be a good communist was one quote from a famous communist I think I've heard. Promoting the insane idea of equality, which is not an ideal, nor is it the truth. The serpent told Eve in the Garden of Eden that you can be equal with God, and that's a lie. And feminist communists have sought to be equal with men, and it's just been a big mess since then. Communism seems to be against men and against nature.
Against men and against nature. Now, like I said, in a more modern sense of communism, we take nature and we treat nature as an equal to us as well. That's kind of a necessity of our species surviving, of us having a sustainable future, or we're nowhere near a sustainable present, but someday maybe.
Around in America, it has sought to render the men unnecessary to the women and to the children, and it does not mind, as he said, famine, abortion, forced vaccination, in the name of, against healthy individuals who are not at high risk from diseases that don't threaten them.
Famine and deprivation come in so many forms, and they come from any transitory moment in history. As long as there has been towns and cities, there's been famine under capitalism, under pseudo-capitalism, under everything. under monarchies, especially under monarchies, uh, that's not an argument against communism. That's an argument against letting people have too much power.
Them, it's a violation of individual. They don't mind
letting individuals have too much power over other people.
A violation of individuals' rights for the so-called collective, the greater good. It pushes the lie of anger to be angry. The communist unions seek to persuade the angry so-called workers to go up against and subvert the bosses who envisioned, started, built, and led the businesses that gave them the jobs. And the communists sometimes pretend to be friends and want mutual benefit for everyone. And some of them may sincerely feel that way, but in the end, it's a phony thing. The best intentions are the road to hell, as you may know. Communists don't mind lying, stealing, and killing to get their way. Many others do too. Dennis Prager said, words and ideas are more important for the intellectual, which is the same thing as...
He's quoting Dennis fucking Prager. Oh my god. This dude is literally quoting one of the most hated people in the Christian sphere. Not just by Christians, but by, well, mostly by atheists, honestly. But he is taking sides within a side that he's already taken. He's pulling a card right out of the shit-talking left, and he's creating infighting within Christians right here. Dennis Prager is a moron, a manipulative rich bastard. And I hope he sees this and tries to sue my ass or something.
A communist or a liberal, than actions in reality. So it's partly why the straight-talking Nazis are much more maligned than the sweet-talking communists, which the mainstream media is, you know, they pander to, basically. In America, I think what we have what I call commie capitalism, because Amazon, Google, Facebook, all of these are in bed with the government. They support Black Lives Matter, Antifa, just destruction of the country. They support the mass immigration that's changing the face of the country.
Okay, this is the first time he's making some decent points. I wouldn't call it commie capitalism. I think that's his way of attacking communism without really understanding what he's saying. It's anarcho techno capitalism, and it's crushing us. And he's right. These billionaires and these corporations are taking our freedoms. That's where I'll agree with him.
And the values of the country. They support the communist shutdowns in the name of the virus that we have that has just destroyed their competition or destroyed the businesses. And just meanwhile, they've made mass profits. And
again, he's just
that means more
calling
power
things
for them as well as for the
communist
government. In America, we're already a
to try to
socialist
get
country.
a point
You don't own your
across
own
to
land or
his
property. You don't have a right.
His already brainwashed audience. They hear the word communism and they get triggered. It's a trigger word for these people.
To contract for work with workers to pay them just $1 or $2 an hour if they want to work that, you know, be an usher or whatever. We've lost a lot of jobs in that way. You have wealth redistribution, which is really more like ghetto redistribution through progressive tax and social programs and affirmative action and all these things. You have the hard.
See, he's making up words, and see, he wants you to hear the word ghetto and say, ooh, ghetto, bad. Wealth redistribution? You mean if people give me money, there's gonna be more ghettos? Oh no, that's bad. Oh no. This guy, he knows how to make an argument to really stupid people. But when he tries to debate anyone who has any idea, I'm no expert on theory. This guy just has zero idea what he's talking about. I just happen to have read a few more definitions than this fucker.
Harsh hand of law, quote unquote law, coming down on innocent capital protesters because the communism seeks to divide and conquer. The whites against the people of color, or the people of color really against the whites, and the liberals against the whites. And it's overwhelming the systems in order to destroy them and rebuild them in their image through immigration. You see the border is just being destroyed because they like to destroy and exploit the crisis and then rebuild it in their image. The government and the media are just filled, in my view, with communists, from Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to Nikki Haley and even perhaps Greg Abbott over in Texas. I don't see capitalism as the opposite of communism. I see it really as good versus evil. So I see capitalism as just as many communists do, as a stepping stone to communism, because when in capitalism we start to do well and then we forget God. You know, the saying goes, tough times make strong men make good times make weak men, and then weak men make
Now
tough
he's
times.
quoting
And that's
Joe
when the
Rogan.
communists like to strike. So capitalism is supposed to be about freedom, but
He
you can't
got
have
that
freedom,
from a
as I
Joe
think John
Rogan
Adams said, without morality.
podcast. I've
So
seen it.
freedom from, it's supposed to be freedom from this degeneracy. But they
Okay,
push pornography and all
okay.
of that madness
This
to
is where
just
I really
subvert
got
families.
upset. Stop
It's
it.
about envy. It's about made up words and false ideals.
Let's rewind a bit. Let's listen to that
Strike.
again.
So capitalism is supposed to be about freedom, but you can't have freedom, as I think John Adams said, without morality. So freedom from, it's supposed to be freedom from this degeneracy. But they
Freedom from this degeneracy. Now, where do you think he got that? Did he get it from the Constitution? I'll give you a hint. No. Oh my god. It's not freedom from degeneracy. It's freedom from religion. That's why we came here, to avoid the religious zealots of Europe who were killing atheists and Puritans for having wild and progressive views. Seriously. America exists. We never would have come here and destroyed all of the Spanish people if it weren't for trying to escape religion, specifically your religion, Christianity, Catholicism. That's what we were trying to escape when we came here. This dude knows nothing.
push pornography and all of that madness to just subvert families. It's about envy. It's about made up words and false ideals, things like racism and just division. Satan came as the angel of light, and evil is subtle. It sounds good. It's an imitation of logic and morals. So that's communism. Don't fall for it.
You got it.
Don't
Thank you very
fall
much, James,
for
for that
it.
opening statement as well. And want to let you know, folks, Modern Day Debate is a neutral platform hosting debates on
Yes,
science, religion,
James.
and politics. And in fact, if
Everyone
you haven't
loves
already,
you.
hit that subscribe
Okay.
button, as we've got many more juicy debates to come. In particular, at the bottom right of your screen, we are excited as Stefan Molyneux and
Excuse me?
Destiny face off the last week of this month. You don't want to miss it, so hit that subscribe button and that notification bell for reminders. And with that, thank you
I'm
very
almost
much,
out of
James and
tea.
Infrared. The floor is all yours for open discussion.
Sure. I want to be kind of brief. I don't want to ramble too much, but I think in the United
always
States, and this is one of
rambles.
the things Infrared wanted to embark upon to kind of change people's perception, is that here in the United States, I think there's a lot of confusion about what communism meant in other countries and how that would apply here. And I think that for several reasons, there has come to be this kind of confusion in this country that there's this association with communism and the experience of communism in Russia and China, the existing communist states that survive today. And there's this association with that, with the current, the deep state and the democratic establishment and George Soros and the NGOs and
Now, he's being very based, but he's trying to use their lingo. He's trying to use this conspiracy theory lingo to relate to these people to get some points across. So I really like these arguments he's using.
the kind of Davos agenda for the Great Reset. There's this association between
I like I like that he's trying to relate to them. It does make him look a little crazy to the people who are probably already on his side. But I see the approach he's trying to take here.
between communism and these things. I think because in the United States, the Democrats are considered left and the Republicans are considered right. So people just have this idea that communism is just the ultimate logical conclusion of the Democrats' current agenda. But I think when you actually study the experience and history of communism in the proper context, you will find that, well, for one, there's a historical tension between communism and religion, but that wasn't necessarily because communism is inherently anti-religious or even inherently atheist. It was because the religious establishments that communists were going up against in their respective countries were deeply rotten and corrupt to the core. They defended the interests of the very corrupt ruling class, and many.
Yeah, so at least Infrared is doing something James obviously didn't, James Hake, which is he's presenting us the he's presenting to us that he actually has researched what the fuck he's talking about. He's done more than talk to God and ask his heart what the truth is. He's actually done some historical research, some policy research, and come to, while I don't agree with him on everything, he's at least come to some good conclusions based on research.
Normal, ordinary religious-minded people could even see that within these very same religious establishments, you had utmost cynicism and hypocrisy. These people that were occupying these roles of religious power didn't actually even believe in it themselves. So there wasn't even really any authentic faith there themselves. And for that reason, communists had taken in the very beginning a negative stance toward religion. But as the experience of communism was able to mature more, especially now, I think a certain understanding has arrived at between communists internationally and religion, which allows for a communism that has room for faith. Not only does it have room for faith, but is actually able to rediscover itself in the history of the world's great faiths. Frederick Engels, Marx's friend, if you don't know who he is, toward the end of his life, he wrote about how in the early stages of Christianity, you found pretty much a very striking parallel to the socialist and communistic movement in Europe, that the principles and values of Christianity are strikingly similar to those of the communists. I mean, the President Putin of Russia has pointed out that the Code of Communist Builders, which was the Soviet kind of like handbook for the Komsomol youth, he said all of these things are already to be found in
Now, I was raised Catholic. I went to church as a little one, and what he's saying is true. Um, a lot of religious values are good, and they do translate to communist values in a lot of cases. Um, I don't think that religion will be protected under law in the same way that it is under capitalism, in that we won't allow them to take advantage with things like tithings and avoiding taxation. You know, they'll be treated more like a private business, which I think is a good thing. Uh, we shouldn't give any sort of uh, it's hard for me to go there, but religious exemptions are kind of ridiculous, right? Because you can you could make your own religion and exempt yourself from, well, in the case of Catholicism, they tend to exempt themselves from things like pedophilia, sexual harassment, um, I mean, just broad manipulation of the masses.
the Bible. So around the world, especially in Russia with its Communist Party, and in Latin America and in the Middle East, and I hope in the United States, communism has not only been proven to be perfectly compatible with faith, but they appear to even complement each other because from the perspective of the world's great religions, we can see the kind of corruption and decadence and inhumanity that capitalism has brought upon the peoples of the world, and the way in which this has to be addressed economically and politically seems to
Sorry
be
for
very
that
much
noise if you can
compatible
hear it.
and similar to what the communists are saying, right? Now, in regards to this question of equality, I think there's also confusion here too, because communists never wanted to make everyone absolutely equal. Because, as Marx, Engels, and Lenin pointed out, people are inherently different. Some people have more skills than others. Some people are smarter. Some people are stronger. And people are different in general. So communists don't have this idea of making everyone equal. We just believe, as far as equality is concerned, no more than what was written in the Declaration of Independence, that we believe that men and women were created equal, right? Which is what the founding fathers of the United States have said. And all that means is that insofar as the government is going to
Men and
serve the
women are
interests of the
created
people, we're going to have a
equal.
government by, for, and of the people. It's not going to privilege these special interests like Amazon and Facebook and other monopolies over the ordinary man. This is our government, and should be treated accordingly. People like Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, and other billionaires are not gods among men. They're not somehow more human than we are. They're not somehow more citizens of this republic than we are. So in that regard, we just, as far as equality is concerned, believe that everyone should have a certain equality before the government, before the law, that allows us to begin with equal opportunity. Now, we're not advocating for an equality of outcomes in life. If you look at communist states like China, you don't find
So, here we go. Now we're going to talk about the CCP and the history of the Socialist Republic of Russia. I didn't even say that right. Just communism in Russia.
Inequality of outcomes between people. And yet countries like China have done a very good job in being able to crack down on monopolies like the ones you're seeing with Amazon and the billionaire class. China is actually an example of a country with a government that isn't able to be infiltrated by the special interests, the corporations, and with their special private agendas that are beyond the interests of the people. So I think we should be clear that communists don't want to completely level society and make it equal. We just want people to be able to have a fighting chance, and that means people
This is true. We don't want like a nation of atheists or a nation of Christians. We've tried that before. We tried the nation of Christians thing in America, and it sucks. It fails. It always leads to corruption. What we want is we want everyone to be able to do whatever they want. If you want to be a Christian, go do it, but don't hurt other people with it, you know? And I'm going to go a little off topic here, but this takes me down the libertarian argument. You know, back in 2012, 2011, when the Obama election was happening, Rand Paul adopted the term libertarian and kind of ruined it for everyone. But before he did that, before like 2009 until 2011, I considered myself a libertarian because the way it was originally defined, and I still define it within myself, is no one cares what the hell you do as long as you're not affecting other people in a negative way. That is the entire argument of libertarianism. Do whatever you want, anything, as long as it doesn't hurt the earth or people in any way. And I think that's a great way to live. That's kind of like the golden rule of Christianity, you know, do unto others as you would have do unto you. Unfortunately, in modern years, people have taken that and they've thought, well, if if I were a trans person, I would want people to murder me because I would be an abomination of the devil. So therefore, I should harass and endanger and belittle trans people. It's this terrible logic. You know, the golden rule was created in such a great it had such great intentions, as did most religions. Obviously not Christianity.
They don't own land, they don't own homes. We want people to be able to own things, because if people are able to own things in general, they're going to have a solid foundation from which to begin and begin as equals.
Are you an atheist?
My personal relationship to
Here we go. This is where I really start to differentiate myself from these arguments, because he's about to argue he's basically saying he didn't drink the Kool-Aid, but he's still stuck in it. He's afraid to admit that he's non-religious, but he makes arguments that are very non-religious because he sees those as the truly moral, the moral side of the debate.
religion, I would say, is complicated, but in certain regards, I think I am an atheist, just in the sense that I don't like making assumptions about what God is and what God wants and who God is. But at the same time, I'm also someone who's motivated by a profound sense of faith, and faith in something that I struggle to call anything but God or a God. But again, because religion has been misused so often in history, I want to be very careful about my own relationship to faith personally.
What is nice about that argument is he's saying, you know, communism is accepting of everyone, and that's why he believes it, because it accepts his belief of God, which is much different from probably other Christians or whatever he considers his belief of God. It's much different from that. And that's okay under communism. You can believe that your turds are sentient and should be cherished. You can believe that if you want under communism. we're open to all beliefs, really.
Where are you from? I'm just curious, if you don't mind.
Oof. Does it really matter? By the way, he was born in America.
Oh, yeah, my parents are from Lebanon.
Okay. This is a quote from Marx, The Communist Manifesto by Marx and Engels. Communism abolishes eternal truths. It abolishes all religion and all morality. Instead of constituting them on a new basis, it therefore acts in contradiction to all past historical experience.
You hear that? He's again he's trying to, I'm sorry, lost the words. He's using these quotes. He's appealing to authority. And they're just bullshit quotes. This dude doesn't think for himself.
At root, is it not atheistic?
I wouldn't say so, because I think what Marx and Engels were trying to say in that regard is that communism doesn't mean to replace all these things with a new religion and a new dogma and a kind of a new tradition. And I think that's very important to keep in mind, because it's very easy to just assume that because you're having this new political movement and phenomena that it's going to somehow make a new religion and make a new thing like that. And also, I think there's oftentimes a mistranslation as far as the word abolish is concerned in a lot of these texts. So oftentimes the word aufhebung, which actually means sublate, which means to preserve while at the same time going beyond, is translated into abolish. And abolish means like to wipe out, right? And oftentimes Marx and Engels write about the sublation of things, which is not necessarily incompatible with their preservation in a new form, right? So the way I look at that and the way I would interpret that is that communists don't want to abolish Christianity. They just want to give a new ground for the expression of the authentic Christian faith
They
without
want to remove
the corrupt religious
corruption.
institutions and establishments which deceive the people and trick people in the
Yes.
name of tapping into their real,
Okay.
authentic faith.
So I missed that the first
Who are
time
just
around,
motivated
but
by cynical interests of serving those in power or serving
That's pretty
special
much what
interests,
I said
or just
earlier.
plainly trying to scam people into making money.
I've seen reports that China, for example, as recently as last year, they were clamping down, I think, on Christians as well as some other religions like Falun Gong or something like that.
They did crack down on Falun Gong. They made it illegal to practice Falun Gong, which is the most innocent religion I've ever heard of. They literally exercise together once a day, and it's kind of like um Shintoism in Japan, where you believe kind of whatever you want, but you believe that everything has a spirit and you respect everything, and you just there's not one god. Everything is a god. You're a god. I'm a god. Love is a god. This house is a god, and we respect it as such. Otherwise, it will bear its wrath on us. And I think that's a pretty cool way to think about the world. Um, but yeah, China did crack down on that. They still allow Christianity because Christians are violent and they take whatever they want. I've already said too much.
And saying we need Marxism, not religion, not Christianity. And I've just noticed that, for example, Armenians, I've had some Armenian friends and they lived in a former communist country. And because of that, there is a lot of corruption and a lot of cheating and low trust society making business practices with many Armenians because of that culture that basically where life is not done. Life was once done in America with a handshake. You did not have to worry about a man that you shook hands with pulling a fast one on you. Whereas that's not the case in many of these communist countries, because it seems to be that communism does not understand, or else it purposely exploits the weakness and corruption and laziness of human nature.
By the way, business is still done that way in America today. If you do things behind closed doors with just a handshake, you can get away with so much more because there's no record of it. You can keep it a secret between two people. And that's how closed door corruption happens in capitalism today. It's not a unique thing to communism where where people's stupidity is used against them. Take wage labor, for instance. We are exploited to work for wages that oftentimes don't cover a humane way of life in most of America. And so, anyway, moving on.
Because it has you where you get something that you didn't earn, and you don't appreciate it. You don't properly take ownership of it.
In regards to the situation of religion within China, Christians are not being cracked down on China for their religious faith. Now, there are very
Communists are not lazy for getting things they didn't earn. People are lazy. I'm sorry. I don't even really have words for this one. I'm going to listen to it one more time and try to think of a way to word that.
Pulling a fast one on you, whereas that's not the case in many of these communist countries, because it seems to be that communism does not understand, or else it purposely exploits the weakness and corruption and laziness of human nature, because it has you where you get something that you didn't earn, and you don't you don't appreciate it. You don't properly take ownership of it.
In regards to the situation of religion within China, Christians are not being cracked down on China for their religious faith. Now,
All I can think is, what about all the people who get things they don't earn in America, except on a on a much less fair scale? Um, Communism doesn't seek to do anything more than give people what they need to live and be happy. It's not like we're trying to make everyone a billionaire. We think the billionaires have too much. We think the billionaires could solve the problems for billions of people.
Now, there are various cults, among them the Falun Gong, which is a cult. It's not really a historical or traditional religion. The Chinese government will crack down on those, but not simply because of, in the name of uploading Marxism versus religion. Now, Chinese society, you have to keep in mind, has historically not had the same relationship to religion that other societies do. The Chinese society has been mostly secular throughout its thousands of years of history, just in the sense that its way of relating to spirituality and religion, all those kinds of things, are done through the concrete bonds of civil society and statehood. So that's not really an innovation of communism. It's just been true for China's history at large. But otherwise, Christians are free to practice their faith openly and freely within China. And events like the Taiping Rebellion in the 19th century within China, which was a Christian religious uprising against the Qing dynasty, was obviously very influential in influencing the eventual communist movement that would come later. So I think there's an interesting relationship to Christianity there. But again, China is not a Christian country. Now, in regards to this cynicism that prevails within Armenia, you have to keep in mind that after the collapse of communism, when the very same forces that conservatives within America are trying to struggle against, basically engaged in the wholesale privatization of the former Soviet countries and pretty much looted them and destroyed their traditions and trying to destroy their culture and set up all these NGOs and things like that to promote a society that was more in line and more within the interests of the American deep state. Obviously, the situation in the post-communist states has been catastrophic, but this wasn't the fault of communists. It actually was the fault of the same global billionaires and the global capitalist class who are funding NGOs, people like George Soros, people like the Ford Foundation and the Rockefellers and all these kind of people who have this they don't only have an agenda for the people of the United States and for this country, which I think to many Americans has been revealed. They had an agenda to completely overthrow the communist states and replace them with liberal democracies. And that has been an absolute disaster for traditions and for culture and for religion, so much so that in countries like Russia, you find the Communist Party to be fundamentally Orthodox Christian at its core. It's allied with the Orthodox Church because both recognize the forces of anti-communism to be a menace to religion within their country. So to me, regarding the promotion of laziness and selfishness, I think you have to keep in mind that in the 20th century, you had this kind of economic equality within communist states, primarily because they were coming from a backwards agrarian society and transitioning into an industrial society. So the goal was just to give people the minimum of just some kind of modernization. Now, when that came into a crisis, communist states responded to that in different ways. But the most successful way a communist state has responded to the issue is the path China took. And obviously, no one can really make the argument that in China, these vices of a lack of economic entrepreneurship,
China is a deep dark hole of war. Oh my God,
things like that is being promoted. China's a very industrious, hardworking, innovative, competitive society, and this is no
lying and cheating.
Sorry,
and lying and cheating. I don't know if that's
I'm not sure. I think that's a culture of lying and cheating is common to all market societies or societies that are part of the global capitalist world economy, right? So that's not something that's the fault of communism. I think that's more something that's the fault of the kind of dog-eat-dog world that we live in. But China has seen profound cultural shifts, and specifically with the presidency of Xi Jinping, we're seeing more of a promotion of morality instead of the kind of unfettered economic growth for the sake of economic growth. There's more of a promotion of moral values and kind of cracking down on this kind of cynical dog-eat-dog society.
Just a side note, you mentioned China. So
those were pretty based points. Yeah, pretty much all of these arguments against communism that he's using apply to capitalism just as well. So there's not much to say there.
So, and you said you talk about we communists, and you distance yourself from Soros and all the Ford Foundation, who I think of them as communists.
Soros is a capitalist. He's a capitalist. I mean, plain and true. And he buys out liberal capitalists, that's all. I mean, at the best, you could call him a social capitalist, which, okay. Who has he really helped in the last 20 years? But right. See, he gets triggered by words like Soros. These people are ridiculous. if you came up to someone like him and said, uh, communism under George Soros is the devil's tango, they would applaud you. And I mean, you could mean nothing by it.
You mentioned Xi Jinping. I guess is that the only communist who is a public figure that we would recognize that you would consider a communist?
No, there are several within Latin America. There's people like Pedro Castillo. There's the leader of the Russian Communist Party, Zayuganov. There's other communists throughout Eastern Europe, leaders of communist parties. And you obviously have communist states like Vietnam, Laos, Cuba, and then also Venezuela.
This debate went calmly until
Hugo Chavez and Nicolas
until
Maduro.
Hake
So there's
defends
many
slavery.
people I would consider
Yeah,
socialist.
I don't know if I got that far.
Anybody
I
in
only made
America?
it halfway through.
It's a tricky question within
was
America because
instrumental
I
in
think that
overthrowing communism in communist countries in the Eastern. Please read Michael Parenti's book. I've never heard of him. I'll look into it for sure. Thanks for showing up, Temple. Be sure to follow. I'll probably be doing more of these debates because this one definitely got me talking.
there has been a big confusion because of the history of the Cold War and the left-right division. Leftists within America and liberals have adopted the communist identity, not because they have any connection to communism globally, but because they just want to kind of spite the right wing, similar to how people adopt the identity of Satanism to spite Christians. But within the United States, we have figures, socialist or left-wing figures that I would consider to be more aligned with the global communist movement, like people like Jimmy Dore, people like
Awesome.
Jesse
Thank you for
Ventura,
following.
figures like Caleb Maupin, who is himself a devout Christian, while at the same time
Temple
being a socialist and a communist. You have people like
Marduk.
Michael Parenti, and this is a new and growing movement, which
Temple
I
of
think in the
Marduk.
future is going to be much larger than it is now. But for now, unfortunately, the American left is dominated by forces subservient to the billionaire class and to what we would consider the forces of American capitalism.
You know, I think of communism as exploiting the natural fissures between society. I've heard that. For example, race in America, they divide the races. They divide, again, worker from
I don't even
worker
have
from
to
boss or
debate
whatever.
this. This is
So-called rich from so-called poor.
wrong.
Men from women. Just
Communities are not about dividing people. They're about working together. That's all.
the
That's all I have
LGBTIQ
to
madness.
say.
I don't see you guys,
LGBT.
and I mentioned this at the beginning. I don't see you
What?
and the infrared people as
LGBT.
being so viciously
You
anti-white,
said it wrong.
so explicitly anti-Christian anyway. How are you gonna get? How are you gonna get your? How are you gonna get communists to become reasonable?
Well, I think you just have to look at the name. So communism, it comes from this common root of common, right? It's about finding what is in
Okay.
common. And that's why for me,
Yeah, I
as
remember
Americans,
this part.
if we're going to be communists, we're going to promote communism.
Makes
We're
a
going to try and
decent
promote
argument.
what is in common between the people. We don't want to divide people or
Oh, man.
accelerate or promote these current frivolous cultural divisions that are being promoted by the media to distract people from their real enemies.
I'll have to
We
look
want the American
into
people
the
to come
Soros
together, to be
Foundation
reconciled with one
overthrowing
another,
communism
so as
in
they
the
can
Eastern
focus their
Bloc, for
attention
sure.
on their real enemy, which is
I
the
know
current
he's
American
nowhere
establishment,
near
the current
communist.
billionaire class, the current oligarchy, and the current monopolies, especially in our particular
all
the
you have
big
to do
tech
is follow
monopolies,
the
whose
money,
power
right?
is so unprecedented that if allowed to continue, they may very well lead to the destruction of our republic and of any semblance of democracy.
Our
These unaccountable
republic.
big tech companies, which are seemingly above the law and don't have to answer to anyone,
Unmasked
who aren't even being
boogeyman.
regulated in
So
any
Chud
capacity. So
stereotypes are
we want people to
okay,
come
but all the rest would get me banned, huh? What's that? What got you banned, boogeyman?
together. We don't want to keep dividing people along these identities. Now, at the same time, we can recognize that there are racial tensions in this country. There is a historical and ongoing, in my view, injustice committed against America's black people because they have been denied the post-Civil War right of 40 acres and a mule, right? And that's not, some kind of total economic equalization. It's just the
Okay,
minimum
this
of
is a
having a solid
crazy
foundation
argument.
with which to build their own community.
I'm pretty sure my family came to America way after the 40 acres and a mule thing. So I want my 40 acres and a mule too, you know? I don't know if I can agree with this argument because then we'd be giving out so many 40 acres. How many people in America never got their 40 acres and a mule? Do we even have that many mules and acres? Anyway,
I think that's the
I
last
just thought
thing they
that
need.
was funny.
Sorry to interrupt. I think that's the last thing they need. And sorry to interrupt, but
Yeah.
they've been given and given and given. It's been debilitating.
I
to them, if
don't
anything.
think they have. I'm not speaking
been
so much of a
given and
handout to
given
make
and
them
given.
dependent on the U.S. government, which I think the
This is where
Democrats
they both
have
kind
played a
of
part in
lose
trying
me.
to, in order to secure them as an electorate. What I'm speaking at is some kind of fundamental just ability to own something from which they can build economically, right?
What in America have African Americans been given and given and given? Since I was born, we've been taking and taking and taking away from these people. I don't get
And
it.
that doesn't take the form of just being dependent
Not
on the
not just from colored people, not from the blacks and brown people, also from anyone who is poor. We've been taking more and more away from them.
government or being dependent on welfare. Actually, if you look at the history of the United States, this ability for Americans to go and get their own land was the foundation of American prosperity and economic prosperity.
Yeah.
You had the I forget the specific name of the act in the 1800s, which allowed Americans who were westward to be able to just pretty much the Homestead Act. Yeah, well, these things were integral for the prosperity and economic flourishment of the United States. People were able to have their own land, and from there they could proceed and build something. And then later on, you had the Populists and the Farmers Alliance, who were struggling to have some kind of land reform and break up the monopolies, and have the government be able to regulate electricity.
We need
and,
to break up the
things like this, so
monopolies
that
again.
monopolists couldn't use it to hurt the little guy. And
I don't care what you say about Twitter and Facebook and all that. They're 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 not in competition of each other. They are Facebook is a monopoly. Right has nothing to do with color, but it still does. Yeah, it still does. Actually, it's very much the opposite thanks to affirmative action. I'm not sure what you mean by it's very much the opposite, but I agree. It is disproportionately affecting people of color. Um, Both our policies and our economic just situations, the way we set up cities and urban areas, it's all very racist, but it's it's also not racist at the same time because they don't care if you're white. The amazing wolf skeptic. Hello everyone. Hey, first time viewer, welcome. Nice to have a skeptic in here. Would love to have a new follower. Um, how MLK can stay popular by supporting legislation that contradicts the quotes that made him famous is beyond me. Well, that's not exactly true.
suffocate his chance.
Okay,
In my view,
you can ask me
the
a
commie
question.
capitalism has made that harder
Am
for
I an
people to afford
anarchist?
things. I think blacks, just as much as anybody, have the ability to gain wealth in this
hold
country,
on
but
a
that
second.
ability definitely is limited because of the subsidizing so-called.
Okay, he's actually making a decent point, I think, which is crazy. I'm not an anarchist, but I am not opposed to anarchist ideas, and I think there is some kind of utopian idea of anarchy that exists out there that could be argued for, but I'm not the guy for that. Very true, unless you huff paint on a daily basis.
Education,
Yeah,
the corruption
paint
of education,
huffers.
Well,
has made people and the
Paint
subsidizing of
huffers
housing
don't make it
and
very
the
far,
minimum wage. Those have all
but
those
they
along with what
need
you just
better
said,
education, and we should help those people who are huffing paint to stop huffing paint. We should make sure they're safe and fed and loved and nurtured so that they might one day realize they don't need to huff paint anymore.
made things harder for normal people to get along. And they have men and women working, which has only made people able to afford more, but then they just raise the prices. And so men and women feel like they don't really have to, but they feel like they almost
See,
have to work.
He's making a good point, but then he tops it off with misogyny. He's saying, well, it doesn't matter that we're equal now with men and women because they just make things cost more. And that's true. It really doesn't matter. But then he says, so we should just go back to the way it was, where women were lesser than men. How is that an argument? How about we just pay people more and don't make things cost so much? Or just make the necessities free and available to everyone? Do you support a transitory state to communism? We're already there. And I don't support every part of it, no, but I do support um, transitions of all kinds, to be honest. I'm not an anarchist, but I'm not opposed to them because they're not relevant to this country or its history. They've they've never spent time building political parties or truly involved in politics for me to care. Uh, I think that's because there's they're a pretty small minority.
Both of them.
Similar to legislation that is racism in itself after MLK's quotes. It should not have been needed anymore or even considered. Um, but you say we just take. What a joke. Yeah, no one's taking anything. We're giving all our time and labor to a capitalist system that is constantly taking more from us. Take Jeff Bezos, for example. We all give him a little money here and there on Amazon, right? Buying a fucking toothbrush or something. But then he doesn't spend it. He doesn't spend his money. He puts it in stocks. He builds spaceships for himself, which isn't really doing us any fucking good because he's just going to steal water from the planet and take it to Mars. Yeah, we all ... including Whitey. uh, that is actually a good answer. We are in the transitory stage of capitalism. Uh, maybe if we could transit into some sort of futuristic form of capitalism, it needs to be totally rewritten.
And then they're
though.
separated from their children. It's such a corrupting influence. Has it not been? Just one quick question. I know I'm adding things on top. Has it not been the case that communists exploited the divisions and balkanization and all that stuff in order to create a crisis and take power?
No, so I think I'll just answer in order, just two things. The first thing is that I do agree that there are current monopoly impediments to the general American's ability to flourish economically, but I don't know if I agree that those things are necessarily the minimum wage and the subsidization of housing and education. Although those being enamored in all the bureaucratic red tape and corruption that they are definitely do need to be improved and made.
See, there's a trigger word for me. I don't like bureaucracy at all. I understand a minimal amount is needed, but it's been bloated and bloated and bloated to the point where it's systemically used to bar people with means testing in a lot of cases, to make sure people don't get the help that they need in a lot of cases, or to shame people into thinking they don't want the help because they're too proud
More
of
efficient.
it.
I agree, but in general, I think the number one obstacle is actually the big monopolies, whether in the form of, in housing, you have financial institutions like BlackRock that are buying up America's homes en masse, which you call commie capitalism. I think I would call it, and this is something that people have referred to it in America, as a kind of socialism for the rich. I mean, the mainstream media tells us we live in a free market.
In a lot of ways, it is socialism for the rich. I'll be right back. I'll let this play for a minute. I can still read chat too. I just gotta grab some water.
Society, but clearly you have all these special grants and favors the government does for the 1% and for the monopolies, right? It gives them subsidies, it gives corporations tax breaks and subsidies the average American doesn't have access to. There's tax loopholes that allow special interests to be able to game the system and basically rig the system. So I do agree, we do have a kind of socialism for the rich. All I'm advocating for as a communist is that we have a socialism for the people instead. And to me, now the second thing about is highlighting the difference. Communists haven't tried.
I'm not sure who that's pointed at, Boogeyman, but I do not suck big tech's dong. I hate big tech. I use YouTube, and now I use Twitch, obviously, but I don't use it for them. I use it for myself, and partly because I have to. And no, I don't like I don't like capitalist monopolies. That's why we created laws against them decades ago. A lot of leftists who defend big tech are not leftists. They're moderates and centrists. See, in America, people on the left, people consider themselves on the left, or at least I should say people who vote Democrat, are not really leftists. They're, on a global scale, they're very much in the middle. Even the UK is left on most things compared to us.
To create crisis in order to seize power.
But
they were rather the ones that...
But that is the misconception, Temple. People have that misconception.
Seized power as a result of crises that no one else was able to overcome. For example, in China, you had the invasion by the Japanese, and communists had a very important part in the War of Liberation and leading the Chinese people against the Japanese imperialists.
I-
And the communists were the most effective in being able to rally the Chinese people and unify actually the Chinese people rather than divide them to create the People's Republic. It's not really the communists that were dividing people. It was their enemies that were promoting various divisions between them in order for the ruling class of the time to be able to maintain its grip on power. So again, I think the primary goal of communists is to unify people. But when we unify people, you're going to see the
agree.
establishment, the mainstream media, the special interests, the institutions, the NGOs, the think tanks, all these kinds of universities. They're all going to rally together.
What do you mean by what is 2A, Boogeyman? I think socialism is pretty base too. In a lot of ways, similar to communism, but see, and I think people on the right should, in theory, support communism more because that's giving the power to the people. That's what America was created to do, I thought. The uniqueness of that form is sought to limit itself via a balance of power, unlike, say, the Nazis or any leftist Okay, Nazism is not a leftist ideology. Communism is. Nazis are a fascist ideology who co-opted the idea of communism so they could recruit from the left and the right, but then they just ended up killing all the people on the left. 2A equals Second Amendment. Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah.
And try to stop it. So conflict will inevitably be generated, but
Like
that's
Trump?
not because it's what we want.
What do you think of Trump and Tucker?
Well, here's what I'll
The world is trending left, true, but that's not the problem, Boogeyman.
say about Trump. I'm obviously not the biggest fan of Trump.
The problem is the bloody mess that's coming from the people resisting the left. You guys think it's going to kill you for some reason.
I think that he made many mistakes. And I think the primary mistake that Trump ended up making was that he
Save
he
face
was
for your
completely beholden
ignorance.
to the Republican
I'm not-
establishment. And I don't think
You're
Trump really had any
lost.
independent direction. I mean, the media was labeling him as
Okay,
a fascist
Boogeyman.
and a Nazi. I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't know what Trump's personal ambitions or goals or loyalties were, but I can appreciate the fact that he did kickstart a movement of Americans who were fed up with the system and who were fed up with the establishment, and he gave them a sense of hope. Now, do I believe Trump himself personally is going to be able to make do?
I hate Trump. I hate talking about Trump this late in, but as far as trending left, Mass Boogeyman, the common people of the world are trending left. The people on top, the people with all the money, they're trending right because that's what makes them more money.
On the expectations he's given to his movement? I don't necessarily think so. And that's why, as communists, we don't necessarily want to go against the Trump movement and Trump people. We rather want to show them that there's a more effective way to fight this establishment than Trump can. I mean,
Yeah, Trump's a moron, we know. It's interesting you've got people on the right who say Nazis are left, and then people view to be, wait for it, leftist. The right left thing is maybe just a piss poor way of understanding politics. It definitely simplifies things to a point where people think they don't have to think anymore about it. People don't look into it enough to even know where they stand on most policies. Communism will never work. Yeah, like you have clearly, Boogeyman, you've clearly never read like a true communist manifesto, you know. The reality of it is that communism has always been co-opted by capitalists who use it for their own gain, which I don't know how that happens other than there's just bad people in the world. Okay.
Trump, for example, was so. I agree. He
Okay.
was very much treated unfairly by the media. He was very much, lied about.
Definitely
and so
not
on
a
and so on.
rock of ignorance.
But at the same time,
Might be a rock,
I think
though.
as communists, we want to propose a more effective and better way of combating the same forces that were demonizing Trump, better than Trump himself could, right? And also part of that means making more alliances, right? We want to reach out and make alliances with leaders of the black community fed up with the establishment. Because believe it or not, the black community is not, as loyal to the Democrats as the mainstream media is trying to say. There's many black people who are fed up with the Democratic establishment. Many Latinos are fed up with it, right? So I think we want to reach out and make even more broad alliances with these groups. Maybe in ways that the current Trump movement hasn't been too successful in doing.
I've noticed that the communist people who I call communists, the people who commonly think of the Antifa, Black Lives Matter, and I have a broader definition than maybe others, they exploit the anger of the so-called minorities. It seems like with this version of communism that you have, you want to exploit the anger of everybody. You want to not exclude the whites, and it seems ripe for that because whites are getting angry as well at what's going on. They've been demoralized, lack of morals, and they see the injustice explicitly in many cases against them and men too. So I don't know. You might be successful in this.
Yeah, I think the first thing I want to say is that to me the so-called Antifa, at least within the United States, they're very clearly foot soldiers of the Democratic establishment. Now, Black Lives Matter as an official organization received funding from George Soros. We all know that. And obviously, it's very ambiguous and mysterious, to say the least, about what interest exactly they're serving. But all I could pretty much say is that there are legitimate grievances.
Now, Boogeyman, maybe I seem like a moron because these two are pretty dumb. But one is obviously a lot more dumb than the other. That's just
within the
obvious.
black community. But I think those grievances are being turned against the Democrats themselves. And as for Antifa, I think the so-called Antifa phenomenon, they're calling themselves communists and they're waving communist flags, but this isn't because they're actually communists. It's because they're trying to instill fear in conservatives. They're trying to provoke fear in the people the so-called deplorables that are against the Democratic establishment. And because most Americans, and this is a result of the Cold War, have fearful attitudes toward communism, these people are trying to exploit that fear and make themselves into a boogeyman, right? Now, as far as the anger and grievances that white people or men are experiencing, I don't necessarily think this is because white people or men are necessarily oppressed, but I think that
I want some pom pom emotes now. Can we get some pom pom emotes? That's a good idea.
many working class people happen to be white, happen to be men, many ordinary regular people. And one of the ways that the establishment is trying to sow division between people is by, trying to, target or, sow racial divisions and make people feel bad or guilty because they're white and promote all this bullshit about how we have to tear down statues of founding fathers and all this kind of stuff. So I do agree that there's legitimate anger there, but I don't think that we should sow more of the division and more of this tension. I think we should recognize.
Afraid of the future, by the way. A future, I believe, where racism won't exist because we will have all the different colors of humans will have mixed together so much after 10 or so generations that we won't even be able to tell who's black or white, brown or red. We'll just all be gray or whatever, and we'll all be beautiful, and it'll be great. And then we'll find something else to hate about each other.
Recognize it as an attempt by those in power to divide people, right? And what communists want to do is we want to bring people together, because we think that they're being distracted with this infighting from their real enemy, and that real enemy is the American establishment.
We're trying to bring people together.
I don't know. There is some truth to that, but the enemy is within. It's a good versus evil, and like anybody with anger is going to end up working against their own interests. I don't think that the black community really has legitimate grievances.
Literally just
at least none of
this dude literally just admitted he believes capitalism good, communism evil. He just says it, and they always just say it straight out. Someone pointed out earlier, this guy talks about slavery. I can't wait to hear that.
None that they're crying about. None that we hear crying about in the mainstream, at least.
Well, the black people that are being given representation in the mainstream don't necessarily represent the grievances of the black community. I do think the black community has many legitimate grievances.
Can you name one?
Yeah, sure. They don't have enough self-determination and independence. They're ruled by police departments that aren't really connected to the community, much in the same way that rural people in the United States have been, since the 90s and the 2000s especially, ruled by these federal agencies that are completely disconnected with them, right? So,
are you aware of the amount of crime that's happening in these communities?
That's pretty true.
And there are
I'm not
others
denying,
who are begging for more police.
Right, but I'm not denying that there's a reality of crime. I just think it's a vicious cycle in which the economic conditions that are promoting crime, namely from this wholesale robbery and scamming of America's black population by the Democrats specifically leads to, and the attempt by the Democrats that seems at least clear to me to target families, right, and make families harder to start. This creates a vicious cycle, which then leads also to a vicious, very vicious form of police repression. Now, I do agree that much of the so-called Black Lives Matter protests were not coming from black people, but were coming from actually primarily white leftists who are serving the interests of the Democrats. I think it's because the Democrats have tried to twist the legitimate grievances of America's various minorities and turn them into a way that will serve their own interests, even though the Democrats are the ones who have betrayed and robbed these same people for decades. Now, our solution to that isn't to focus on the anger and aggravate grievances, but find a way that we can come together in order to address our common problems. We don't really want necessarily people to be angry. We just want people to feel powerful enough, to feel brave enough, and to feel bold enough to stand up for what's right and to fight for their own republic, right?
But that will never happen as long as people have their heads in their ass about politics. As long as people don't learn, we're screwed.
To fight for a republic by, for, and of the people, because this establishment, these corporations, and our deep state is nowhere to be found in our Constitution. It's an overgrowth on our republic that was not intended by our founding fathers and is threatening to devour our republic itself. Now, I want to make a prediction. I'm looking at the media and I'm looking how they're promoting people like Meghan Markle. And it seems to me they're trying to prepare her for some kind of political existence or presence. And I find it a nightmare that it's a possibility that our elites are planning on dismantling our republic and basically installing the British crown to rule us, right? So I think this is something we really have to keep in mind. And it's something, as a communist, I want to get the word out on.
You mentioned fighting for what's right. How are communists to fight for what's right if they have no God, no morals, no absolute standard? They just do by any means necessary. Is that not a communistic line, or is that just in America? By any means necessary.
Yeah, well, religious faith is not dogma. If we had an absolute standard, it wouldn't be faith. We wouldn't need to have faith.
I'm part of the debate
now. The reason we have faith is we're putting our trust in something we don't necessarily know, right? And I don't think communists. I don't believe the majority of communists are without a God. Even as an atheist for most of my adult life, I have come to see the value and importance of the feeling of God at the very least, right? The presence of God, right? So I don't necessarily, it's not that communists are against God. It's just that we're reluctant to focus too much on it because it can very easily be twisted to serve the opposite. Now, the very religious, the great religions of the world warn about this. They warn about how people do things in the name of God, say things in the name of God, while in reality serving Satan, right? It's you yourself pointed out earlier that, I forgot exactly what it said, but evil does disguise itself in the form of good. And as beautiful as I consider the great religions of the world, it's precisely because of how good, true, and beautiful that they are, that evil forces have used them for completely opposite purposes, right? So that explains really historically the reluctance of communists to really get really deep into the religion. But we saw in the Soviet Union how, for example, when the Germans invaded their country, they rediscovered the Russian Orthodox faith. This pure sense of faith, divorced from the institutional corruption of the church,
for his,
which I think was a more authentic and
oh my God, I don't even want to know what kind of
than the one that existed before communism, right? So we have to bear in mind, communism is not incompatible with religion. I think you can even go so far as to say that communists merely want to do good in the world. We don't want to make heaven on earth, but we want to be good people in this world. We don't only want to focus on the...
I want to make heaven on earth. You know why? Because I don't believe in heaven. It's that simple. If Earth is anything, it's hell, and we're already there because it sucks. Surviving isn't fun. We find ways to make it fun, but mostly by ignoring the bullshit. So 2A has socialism to thank. Yeah. Nazis are not socialists. Nazis are fascists. Fascists. Can you say that? What's the problem here? Now, America already has a little bit of socialism.
The afterlife in heaven, because this world does matter. What we do in this world matters. If we didn't believe that, then how could we condemn and recognize the evil of what our elites are doing? We clearly see that this is evil because we know that what happens in this world matters.
I think that everybody sees evil, but they're not good at diagnosing it, nor are they good at coming up with the right solutions for it. They end up creating more evil. It's like an imitation of logic. Because Karl Marx himself said, his Marxism cannot be conceived without atheism. And
Well,
I think
yeah,
it's more. I think it's more than you're letting on. It's more
well,
atheistic
here's
than you're letting
why.
on.
The reason there's confusion around this is because historically religion
He's
had
quoting
taken the form
dead
of philosophy
people,
in
so-
Marx's time, right? Marx wasn't thinking about religion beyond philosophy, and in the philosophical sense, Marx was an atheist. He did wholeheartedly reject religion, but that's because, in my view, the meaning of religion became perverted by philosophy, and what was once an authentic and material form of faith, right, just based in feeling and intuition and true faith and conviction, turned into dogma, and it turned into
Okay, now you're actually making some interesting statements, Boogeyman. You said socialism is 100% responsible for empowering the fascism to run rampant. I've never looked into that, I'll be honest. But it sounds to me like you think fascism is born out of what, poverty? Is that really what you're thinking? Because I think it's much more likely to be born out of religion than the economic status you're in. If anything, being poor would make you would want socialism, not fascism. Hey, thanks for following, Bumblebee. That's awesome. And hello to you. Nazis weren't socialists, though. That's the exact argument I was trying to make earlier. Nazis are not even close to being socialists. They don't want to give you anything, they want to take everything away from anyone they don't like and keep it for themselves. Because fascism.
this kind of absolute guarantee that I view is inherently corrupt. But I don't think that you can reduce people's religious feelings to that. I think people's religious feelings is authentic. Marx also agreed it was authentic. Marx called religion the heart of a heartless world.
There are many forms of socialism, including the few forms we have here in America. We have the welfare state, which is a form of socialism, although a very weak and inefficient form of socialism. And then there's also, like they mentioned, the socialism for the rich, where as long as you have a bunch of money, you can keep making as much money as you want and get anything you ever wanted. Because, so in that sense, you already have everything you ever need.
He said religion was the only way people were able to give expression to their authentic humanity, right? Now, whether or not you believe that in building a more human world, religion is going to disappear, we can all agree that there is something fundamentally good about
I didn't
religion.
know that. That's an interesting fact. The first, and I'll research it later to make sure it's true. The first literal thing Hitler did once he got into power was privatize a ton of state-run industries. Which makes sense, because why would you want the state running something that you as an individual are trying to control? You know?
Marx himself was making the point that the problem is not religion, the problem is our current world. And
correction, 2A would not exist without guns. And by the way, I'm not getting into guns in this stream. I'm just not.
the evils that we associate with religion are a reflection of the evils of our world, right? So it's kind of more of a philosophical issue that shouldn't be taken at face value, because his historical experience shows, and this is especially true in 2021, that in no way is religion incompatible with communism.
Have you noticed that males who are communists have a female version of logic?
This is where I paused and had to reassess my whole day and decided to stream this.
Where it's always excuse after excuse. It's not responsibility. Like the solution for the black community is responsibility. It's not, oh, they have these grievances, the police. The police are not the black community's problem at all.
Well, here's
Exactly. What is a female version of logic? And he is arguing that the female logic does nothing but complain. They refuse to solve problems. He doesn't say the word, though. He doesn't say the one word that he knows would trigger all women. Bitch. He doesn't say it, but he's thinking it. You can read it on his forehead.
Have you noticed that they have like a female mindset? just
Yeah.
excuses?
I would just say two things. First thing I want to say is I do consider
A
it an
female
important feature of
mindset.
manhood that we recognize we're not going
And
to
they
insert
both
ourselves
go
in other
there.
people's business, right? So I
They
think black people
both go
themselves
there.
are best equipped
This
in being
is
able to
some
diagnose their own problems and what
misogynistic
those are. And I agree
bullshit.
that the white left is
This
trying to
is
speak
why
on
they're
behalf of them and
chuds.
make excuses or whatever. I agree. They're trying to speak for black people, right? But regarding this kind of, I guess you're calling it female logic.
Yeah.
I think you
Excuses.
don't really find communist men in this country, in the United States,
The
all that
opposite of
much.
individualism.
But that's also because, and this is historically true, and this is actually true in the ex-communist states, the ruling elites, and this is especially true for this more overly socialized and more urban people, right? The students and people who don't really work with their hands, they tend to be more less manly, to say the least.
I don't know anything
in
about him.
Eastern European
I
countries,
hope he
those
doesn't have
people
a
are actually the
wife.
right wingers, and it's the communists who are more
I feel
conservative
so bad for
and
her.
down to earth and so on and so on. I think this issue, as far as manhood is concerned, it is, it's really, I guess, as a communist, it is embarrassing to see the type of communists that claim to represent what this tradition is. But that's why I'm trying to set a different example, and several others are trying to set a different example, so that communism won't be associated with that anymore. I do agree that the so-called self-proclaimed leftists and
The R word is nothing compared to. They're not even in the same ballpark. Go have a candy or something. No cookies for you, though. You get no cookies.
communists in America, in the main majority of them,
Yeah,
especially the ones coming
socialists
out of
can
these
have
universities
guns.
and
I
academia,
don't care.
they're fundamentally
It's
morally,
not illegal to have
spiritually,
guns. It's illegal to kill
however you
people.
want to put it, bankrupt people. They have no sense of honor. They have no sense of dignity. They have very slimy, tactics. I myself know this firsthand because I've been victim of them, right? I know how dishonest
Hey, thanks for following.
and inhuman and dishonorable these people truly are, right? I know that firsthand. But at the same time, the way I see that is it's the same reason why you see
Why
religion
can't I
being
read
corrupted. Because
that
to me,
word?
evil
Ornithine? Oh my gosh. I'm gonna have to blow that up, make it big. Ornithine. Ornithine? Oh no, where'd the stream go? Oh, look at me. I did it. I done messed up. Anyway. Ornithine. Hello. It's a very difficult name. You definitely killed my stream. That's okay. We're back now.
evil takes the form of good. It disguises itself as good. But I do fundamentally
Thank you
believe
for the
that at its
follow.
core,
I'm back to 60
communism
again. That
is
feels
good.
good.
I just think
Going
evil
for
people
100.
in this country specifically
Should make it there by
have been
Christmas.
corrupting it for completely and wildly different ends.
That's human nature. What religion were you before you became atheist? Out of curiosity.
I came from a Shia Muslim background.
Okay. Last quick question. I know that.
See, he calls himself atheist, but he's afraid to reject any sort of religion because clearly his family would reject him. At least that's my
I think we're
assessment.
running out of time.
I'm loving the purple hearts.
The Hong Kong protests is my impression is it was communist students fighting against the communist establishment government. What's your take?
The issue with Hong Kong is very complex, but needless to say, as we've noticed in the United States and throughout the world, you have vested interests trying to promote these color revolutions and these fake revolutions to promote all this social unrest. And it's not really, it's not an organic, like spontaneous thing,
funny.
just like how we saw in the United States with George Soros funding unrest and protests
he keeps
here.
bringing up those
These same
words.
people were funding the unrest and protests in Hong Kong. Now, a lot of that grievances of people in Hong Kong came from the fact that there's no housing in Hong Kong, right? There's no land for people. It's people can't find a.
And he's failed to make the argument that the Chinese Communist Party is not really communism, and China is not a communist state. They're very authoritarian in nature.
Affordable housing, and life is getting.
Well, okay, they're communist until they need to be authoritarian in their eyes, and then they just do whatever they want. Like you're free until they until they decide to fuck with you, which can happen at any moment. So that's the problem with the Chinese government.
harder and harder
in
in
my
Hong Kong. And that's
eyes.
also because the communist government doesn't enforce its economic policies
Very
in Hong Kong,
capitalist,
which
but
are very
that's not their fault.
pro-people
That's our
policies.
fault.
So it lets Hong
We
Kong have
gave
its
them
own system. And this
capitalism.
led to a lot of
America did.
grievances that, because it was exploited by global forces, was blamed on the Communist Party, right, in Hong Kong. So I think we have to look at Hong Kong. Also, look at the protests in Russia with Navalny. Look at the protests in Belarus.
I don't
Look
think
at the
we need
protests in Latin
authority to
America.
agree.
We should all look at these in the same lens with which we look at, with the same level of suspicion, a lot of the unrest that happens in this country.
Interesting. That's about all I have for you.
He's already
Ready
done.
to become a
He
communist,
had nothing
James?
good to say.
No, his answers for me are Haz's answers for me are they muddy the water. They do explain that.
Is he defending China in the Hong Kong situation? You know, I didn't really follow what he was saying about that. Partly because I was looking at chat, but let's see if we can.
Led to a lot of grievances that, because it was exploited by global forces, was blamed on the Communist Party, right, in Hong Kong. So I think we have to look at Hong Kong. Also, look at the protests in Russia with Navalny. Look at the protests in Belarus. Look at the protests in Latin America. We should all.
It sounds like he's blaming Hong Kong for the problems in China. That is so off base. Like he's been on key about so many things, and then he brings this up. How is? Yeah, he made it sound like like Hong Kong caused the problems, but it didn't. Hong Kong is not the only communist party.
All look at these in the same lens with which we look at, with
I don't
the
know. He
same
brought up
level of
guns. He's
suspicion,
one
a
of
lot
those
of the unrest that happens in this
those
country.
people. He likes guns.
Interesting.
I own guns, by the way.
That's about all I have for
but
you.
I'm strictly against murdering
Ready
people,
to become a
even
communist,
for war.
James?
No, his answers for me are Haz's answers for me are they muddy the water. They do explain that a lot of this stuff is just evil human nature. But I think that a lot of it is one cannot tell what actually happened in history. Look at how the media lies about the present day. So we don't know who did what and what the motive was. They lie about Charlottesville. They lie.
See, when he says the media, he's talking about cable news. Gun rights are not the best example to use. They're just what people on the right obsess over. What was he
about
saying?
the Capitol, mostly peaceful Capitol protests on January 6th.
The mostly peaceful.
They lie
Capitol
about the Black
protests?
Lives Matter movement.
Okay.
They even seem to have Haz fooled
not a
on
fighter.
the black
I love it.
community's grievances. So it's
Yeah, we
to
could
me, I
solve
think
so
it's
many more
a
problems by
who
working them
knows,
out
who cares
instead
type
of
of thing,
killing each
as
other.
far as the history goes.
Bro, he's trying to say that BLM is bad, just like communism, because that's what he was told. That's the extent of his argument. It's so shallow and non-existent. It's just like the conversations he has with his priester and church buddies. It's ugly.
I like to know present day reality, have responsibility, and not throw out God with the bathwater.
Juicy, any last thoughts, Infrared?
I think it was an overall productive, good conversation. I guess I would say, with regards to the Black community, I think this is our main point of contention. I would just recommend reaching out and listening to many Black leaders, right?
I don't think it's a good thing we have a culture around guns. Guns are a tool. They're to be used to solve like hunting problems, you know?
right? Because these are not people who are co-opted by the Democrats. They're against the Democrats, and I do think they authentically, are leaders of their own community. They have their own specific views, and they're completely demonized by the mainstream media as well. And it's something that they have in common with American conservatives. So
Okay, Boogeyman, but look at it the other way. A tool to steal the security of other free states. It's not good. I mean, you, your argument would also say that nuclear weapons are okay, and I strongly disagree with that notion.
So I just think that that's important for unity. But I do overall agree that the media
Disarm
sows
the military.
unnecessary
Disarm all
division. But at the same
militaries,
time,
sure.
that doesn't mean we shouldn't be trying to make an
Let's go
effort
back
to
to
bridge
fighting with
those divisions, because there
No.
are, in my view at least, based in very real realities.
Let's go back
I
to
like
not
to-
fighting. How about that?
Yeah. Do you have any? Who would be a black leader
Pipe dreams.
that you think of as a leader?
Well, historically, you have organizations like the Nation of Islam, right?
Oh man.
Yeah, I mean, you have you have the tradition of Marcus Garvey historically and its successors. You have Malcolm X historically, who famously called the Democrats the wolves in sheep's clothing. So it's a very rich tradition, and there are living people who
No,
represent.
I talk with blacks practically every day on my radio show. Some of them have sense. Some of them agree with me.
Let's
Many
smoke
of them
weed,
agree
not
with me.
war.
Many don't.
Yeah,
Many have
sure.
that anger. They've taken on false identities. They think they're black Hebrew Israelites, or they have embraced the Islam stuff. the Nation
Boogeyman,
of
you're
Islam. What do your parents think when
crazy.
you left the Shia Muslim
You're
thing?
nuts, okay?
I think they were okay with it.
You're insane.
Primarily because I did have issues with religion growing up, but I've come to a perspective where I have great respect and reverence for all of the world's major religions. And also I acquired, actually, as a communist, a newfound appreciation for Christianity, and
As if
in particular,
being
right?
neutered
Because
has
of how
anything to
closely
do with
entwined
like
communism historically
righteousness.
has been with
What if
Christianity.
people want to be neutered?
So to me,
Who cares?
I find beauty
not
and
your
truth
balls.
in all of the world's great religions.
I think it's important that we not get caught up in the identities where you can't just tell
My
people the
computer
truth
just freaked out.
on for example, for the Hake report, I call on my show, I call
2A has
I
been
call
neutered.
blacks out, I call
See, now
women
you
out,
finally
I
made a
call
decent argument.
the black
But,
Hebrew Israelites out, and they can call
it
in
hasn't really?
disagree with me.
2A hasn't been neutered, really, because what has actually happened is we've created deadlier and deadlier guns, and we've had to limit the amount of deadliness someone is allowed to carry. Do I really have the right to carry bombs? No. Do I have the right to carry a weapon that can kill 30 people in 2 seconds? I mean, that's crazy. When the Second Amendment was created, we barely had semi-automatic rifles.
Me, I call both the rhinos and the Democrats out,
People were still
the
using
mainstream
muskets.
media. But I think that we should have the freedom of speech to just say our impression, especially whites and men, because and Christians, they're some of the most docile and submissive lately, and fearful and falsely intimidated, because look at what is happening with Kyle Rittenhouse. He's charged
Oh no,
with murder
white men are the
over
docile
a clear case
ones
of
now.
self-defense.
Oh no.
People don't have justice, and we have lost a sense of justice and freedom here.
I definitely agree that I do believe that Americans' freedom of speech has been curtailed, specifically and especially by the big tech companies.
I know, it's insane.
Regardless of
it
who
pissed
I
me off
agree or
so
disagree
much.
with,
That's why I had to
I
go
do think
live.
people should be allowed to give authentic expression to what
Vibing.
they really do believe.
Sweet
and,
shit, Bree. I love having
what they
you
really
here.
do feel, because regardless of whether I agree with it or not, it's a first step in being able to come to a point of unity.
Redneck
and
whiteys
mutual
with guns are the
understanding.
problem.
And
No, that's
I think a
actually
good
not
example
true.
of this was recently, and
There are plenty of redneck whiteys with who own like one gun and they use it a couple times a year to go hunting. And that's fine. There are some redneck whiteys with guns. You keep generalizing. That's your problem.
Let's not get into the details of it because I'm on Twitch, so
Yeah.
I'm not sure what. But recently with Dave Chappelle's Netflix special, right? And he was trying to just give
God,
authentic,
I haven't heard this yet.
expression to what he believed, and he was canceled for it.
Is he
now
really
he's having
standing
trouble
up for
finding
that shit?
ways to get his movie published and
Chappelle
stuff. So it's like
used to be a
his
comedian.
stuff published. I mean, so
Now he's an
it's
angry
really a
rich
shame
dude.
that we've just created
Sorry.
this culture of lying and people not even being honest because they're too scared to speak what's on their mind.
What's up,
one
South
quick
Carolina?
other point, you mentioned black leaders. I think that one of the problems with men is that we have people that we put up as leaders. We should not be doing that. We should be our own leader, and then we unite together and work together. And
Yeah? Is
somebody-
that
if somebody's gonna
communism,
be
you dumb
a
fuck?
president like a Trump, then that's fine. But he is not.
See,
he is not put up on a
he
pedestal.
just doesn't know what
where
he's saying.
He is
He doesn't know what communism
influencing
is.
our thought any more than any other man
Yeah,
would
Netflix
be.
kind of
And you can hear the truth
dropped
from
the
any
ball
man,
on
even
that one,
even your
especially when
enemy.
they fired the
I
organizer
agree with
of the
that.
walkout.
I do agree that we shouldn't get caught up in as men, especially as men. And I can't speak for women because I'm not a woman, right? So I can just speak for men because that's what I am.
Yeah, how about you do that?
So I'm not assuming that they're different or something, but I'm just I agree that we shouldn't be relying and putting all of our trust in just other men, right? Part of being a man is being your own man, having your own thoughts, and being able to think for yourself. So I completely agree with that.
I think that's been the part of the problem with the black community is they've had these people that they've propped up as leaders, and they've made them into heroes. And you see
the black community,
human
here we go
nature to do
again.
that, especially nowadays because men
here's
are
the
aimless.
thing: is that I think ultimately I believe that black people themselves.
Okay, you're arguing that small arms are enough to deter tyranny. What if the tyrants? No, what if the tyrants have nukes? What if the tyrants have missiles? What if they have drones? Small arms aren't enough to defend us from tyranny anymore. The kind of tyranny we see is dropping entire buildings, dude. We don't see people pulling out their pistol in the name of tyranny to destroy communism or whatever the fuck you're getting at. It's not pistol versus pistol. It's hunting rifles versus an entire, like, if Soviet Russia invaded with their military, are we going to stop them with hunting rifles?
Know
Fuck
what's
off.
best and know how to best diagnose their own problems, right?
I think that they need our help. We're all human beings, and we all have the freedom of speech, and they can hear the truth from other races. They need to learn to do that, especially whites.
But they also have.
They close their minds to whites, and it's not good for them.
Well, I don't know if that's necessarily true because they just have different experiences. They have a different situation. They have different circumstances, right?
But
oftentimes it's hard
might
for white
need to
people
be
to relate
neutered.
to that because
That might
they
be
don't
exactly
share
what
those
you
same
need.
experiences and same circumstance.
But they're all nose up against this imaginary problem that's called racism.
Get some estrogen
whereas
in you.
whites don't have
Think
that
a little
blind spot.
clearer.
And sometimes it takes somebody from the outside looking in to see through the madness.
Well,
Occasionally, someone will wake up.
Well, listen, that also manifests in the form of white people not experiencing this racism, right? So if they haven't experienced it,
It doesn't exist.
well, that's I think where we would definitely have to disagree. I think racism is a real thing.
If racism is real, then blacks are the primary offenders.
I don't agree, but
Free
one thing I
neuterings.
can say is that
Over
to
here.
me, as far as I'm concerned,
Come here and I'll neuter you for
the
free.
Democrats
Hashtag not a
are
doctor
a very
or a
racist party
surgeon.
and are a big source of what I would consider real white supremacy. I don't think that rural, ordinary Americans are the main culprits of white supremacy. I think it's actually the Democrats and the liberals who are the most effective sources of racism in this country.
You can identify that you well, no. You can identify however you want, darling.
White supremacy is happening.
Enjoy your 20-foot dong. I'm sure someday we'll have surgeries that will let you have that 20-foot dong, and I will be so proud of you for being in the body that you always desired. That'll be so great.
In America?
Obviously, yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what America you're looking
But
at.
I just think that
Okay.
I just think ordinary Americans and rural Americans who are white actually have more in common
I hear you.
with black
hear you,
people in
Bree.
terms of, being down
It's
to
rough out
earth
here
people
for-
instead of being
all
these
women.
stiff, liberals who do epitomize what we would consider white supremacy, right?
That's why Trump was such a uniting force for people with any decency.
Well, in many ways, you could say that liberals were far more white supremacists than Trump,
You want
because
good. You have
he was more relatable
Boogeyman,
and
you
more
get
down to earth, whereas
unimpeded
they are
access
more
to
obsessed
all
with
handicapped
purity and
restrooms.
political correctness.
Congratulations.
And many have
Enjoy
pointed
your
out
20-foot dong.
this is a feature of
Enjoy
white
using
supremacy. But
6 inches of
regardless,
it when you fuck people.
Yeah,
Are your parents more conservative or liberal?
they're really not political.
Non-political. Yeah.
You got it. We'll jump into the Q&A. This has been an enjoyable one, to say the least, so we're going to jump into these questions. Want to remind you of a couple of things. One, if you have a question, feel free to fire it into the old live chat. We'll go for about 30 minutes. And also, our guests are linked in the description. So if you want to hear more of James Hake or
I didn't even
Infrared,
hear the
you
end of that.
And that includes
I was
if you're
busy
listening via
yelling
podcast,
at
because we put all of our
Boogeyman.
guest links in the description box.
They're about to
for
get into
each
some
podcast
questions.
episode
This will be
as
the
well.
good shit.
And so you can find
probably.
their links there as well. So jumping right into it with this first one from Lin Yan Chin says, debate is useless noise that never resolves anything. It's just prattling for amusement.
It's true.
Men
because
don't do that, but
most of the time people go into a debate already knowing what side they're on. And even if they're in the middle, sometimes people sound like they're making the correct arguments, but they're just
Peter
not.
Bales do. God bless you, Lord
Like,
Goodhair.
it can all be very manipulative.
Thank you.
Is what I'm
Appreciate
saying.
that, Lin Yan Shin.
Next up, Shaggy
You
Boy
wouldn't even
says,
be able
"Let's
to get a
go."
Woody with a
And
20-foot
Anna
dong. And if you did, it'd be
Rodriguez
dragging.
says, I love you, Hake.
Nice.
Oh,
Love
that-
you
Those
too.
would be some strong muscles to
Ozzy
keep
says,
that dick
you
up.
convinced me. Havoc. Is havoc like some sort of slang
Yeah,
word? Is that, are they trying to make
you
fun
would
of
not
Hake? They
be
say, I'm an atheist,
conscious
so
for
I
that
must
boner.
be communist. Sarcasm. Then they say, thanks for
Unless it was
convincing
like
me that I am
noodle
not
thin.
on your team.
Like the size of an artery.
Well, all atheism is not communist, but all communism is atheist.
See, this is the logic
Juicy,
this guy
one coming
has.
in from
He
Chris
reduces
Morlock
things
says,
to that.
there are almost as many people in China that identify as religious as there are in the U.S., about 120 million. Why is this, James?
Well, there may be. I mean, there's so many people in China for one, but under
Your
hard life,
arguments are
I don't
so
know
cringe,
if they
dude.
are real Christians. It's hard to know. It's hard to know how many real Christians there
Yeah,
are in America.
we have guns. We already have the right to use. You're arguing for things you can already do. Okay. What the fuck ever?
So many, as Haas pointed out, so much of the organized religions, it's just filled with phony people. And so I don't know, maybe the tough times are making a Christian movement rise in China, but for sure there is
She said she was
they have to suppress themselves.
anti-murder,
They don't have the freedom of speech. And
you're disgendering her.
I've heard of struggle sessions in communist worlds where they try to force people to believe things that aren't true. And if you don't believe it, you go through what Dave Chappelle is going through, or worse, really.
You got it. And this one coming in for Infrared. Kevin Dunn asks, why can communists openly be on all big tech platforms, but NAZIS can't?
Yeah, I think the issue is that there's just not a lot of people who are informed about communism, and the mainstream political establishment hasn't had to deal with. There has been a very clear neo-Nazi phenomenon. There's been a kind of right wing, ultra right movement in the United States. There hasn't really been a communist movement in many, many decades in this country that has posed a threat
Thanks to
to the
propaganda
establishment. So I think that pretty much
and whitewashed history books.
explains the majority of the reason why you don't really see a crackdown on it. It's just because it's not really that it's politically relevant to the U.S. beyond recently becoming a symbol of the liberal democratic extremists, right? But beyond then,
Ornithine
beyond
in
that,
with
I think it's
the
all related
kicker.
to
Have you
politics, I guess.
have you
That's a
caught
good one.
hate for not hating white people enough as a leftist?
I have been accused of being a white supremacist. I've been accused of being a white chauvinist, and this was all because I insisted on the fact that communists have to be patriots. And that doesn't mean you agree with everything your
What?
government does or you agree with your government. It means you have a love of your country and its people and your people, right? And for that reason, I
No.
have been attacked. And
No. Patriotism leads to ethno-states. Like America. That's why we won't let immigrants in, even though we're a nation that was born from immigration.
called a white
No.
supremacist, which is ironic because
Infrared is one
I'm
of the
not
most
sure if
right-wing
I
communists I've
am
heard in a long
considered
time.
white. It's not something I pay a lot of attention to, but my
Right.
parents are from Lebanon. I'm from an Arab background, so it's really weird how people are trying to use race against me when
White enough. You're white enough to be hated, I guess.
yeah.
This one coming in from Chris Morlock. For you again, Hake! They say there are 44 million Christians in China. For comparison, there are in total about 18 million, so far less, Chinese people that live in the U.S. How is the People's Republic of China against Christians? It's kind of
Look it up.
It's not.
This one
It's not.
from Chris Morlock
It's-
says,
America is against Christians, by the way. Just FYI. But anyway,
Finally,
says, quote, religion
Good.
is the sign
Goodbye,
of the
Christians.
oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of soulless conditions, unquote, Karl Marx.
that's nice. It's tough times
Inf-
do make you
Infrared is a
turn to
tool.
God
He seems to be
sometimes, and
everywhere,
that's
though.
important.
This is the first
Karl
time
Marx,
I've seen
although
him.
he was a blind
I
atheist,
heard his name for the
was
first
right about
time
that, I
last
guess.
night, I think.
This one coming in from John Kramer says, I'm here to support
He was trying to
Hake of
talk
the
to
Hake
Vaush.
Report. Says, keep speaking the truth, brother. Also, thank you for having this platform. Thanks for your encouragement, John. And as mentioned, Hake, they are here to support you, Hake.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Black Lennon says, question for Jake. I think they mean Hake, but
Yeah.
might also be Hank.
Jay Hake.
They say, what do you think of the labor aristocracy? Do you deny it? What's your thoughts?
I have no
Labor
idea what that is.
aristocracy.
The labor aristocracy.
See, because he didn't take a second to think about it. So what is an aristocracy? It's when a group of rich people run the country, right? It's not that hard. What was the other word?
We by
Sorry.
the heart of a heartless
forgot what
world
the question
and the
was.
soul of soulless conditions, unquote, Karl Marx.
That's nice.
I went too far back.
It's tough times.
It just made me think, we need T and Earl here. But anyway, red-blooded Republican Trumps says, how do you explain,
Oh,
sorry, I
no.
cut your name off there, friend. I know it probably says more than that, but it says red-blooded Republican Trump, ... How do you explain the current failures of communism in America being the American Indian reservations?
I don't
It's a
know
tough
exactly
question.
what that's referring to, but I think the failure of the communist movement within the United States, I think, is a theoretical issue. It's the problem is the type of people, intellectuals, who are attracted to communism, are attracted to it because they're antisocial and they I guess they were the losers
What
in
is-
life. And,
what is
they
this
turned to
argument he's
communism for that
making?
reason. But I don't know how
No.
this relates to.
The failure of communism in America is explicitly because the capitalists of the country do everything they can to squander the idea of communism. They make it seem evil through movies and media. It has nothing to do with that. Infrared is crazy.
the
Not as
reservation
crazy
system,
as
but
James Hake, though.
I think that's how to explain the failure of the movement to ever really be able to kick off here.
I think he's pointing out that the American Indians they get payouts, whether it's from the casino payouts and things like that, and that ends up being debilitating to them, and so they don't end up
What?
doing for themselves and working for themselves and taking responsibility.
The
I've known
racism
some
is the
Indians who got
debilitating part.
kicked out of their Indian
What?
tribe, and that was honestly the best thing for them. They quit being deadbeats. They started working and got their lives together.
They quit being deadbeats. They quit being deadbeats? Are you serious? Oh my god. No, they assimilated from their previous way of life into your way of life, and you consider that being productive. That's just you being a reductionist colonist. Am I communist? Well, no, I live in a capitalist country. I believe a lot of communist things. Um, I don't I don't take any one stance when it comes to communism or socialism. I think there's a proper mixture that we need to find, a right balance of all of it. Um, However, I do believe that capitalism
And
is not the
had
answer.
families.
Well,
Not
I
even
think
close. Especially postmodern capitalism that we're living in today.
all I would say to that, I'm not really familiar with the situation of the reservation system, but what I do know about it is an important part of communism is sovereignty. It's being able to have the necessary level of control and self determination over your community. And as far as the reservation system is concerned, it has been
I do believe that the workers should own the means of production. So if that's your definition of communism, then yes, I suppose.
a form of. We all know that there has been various treaties violated, and the way in which Indians, or I don't know if I have to say Native Americans, have been um, have been treated by the U.S. government has been very unfair, and they have been,
Racism.
they have not had a good deal, as far as I would put it, if you want to put it in Trumpian terms. So I don't know if it'd be a good example of communism as much, maybe
Okay.
internalized corruption, and yeah.
You seem to have like that same woman's mindset, if you will allow me,
Yeah.
in that you have like this feeling sorry for these different so-called oppressed groups, these minorities, if you will. The
Well,
Indians,
Trump
American
talked
Indians.
about how the current
Well, I explained earlier that I used to see myself as a libertarian until the right took over that term. So I kind of agree with Vaush when he says that he's a socialist libertarian. It kind of suits what I'm in for. I think we have the means to help everyone, and so we should. And people will do that on their own volition as soon as we get rid of the inequity of capitalism.
U.S. government wasn't a good deal for the American people. The policies
True.
of our government and its industrial policy,
That's true.
American people were getting ripped off. It's not necessarily making excuses or
We are
blaming.
getting
It's just
ripped
pointing
off.
out that the Native Americans or so on, they haven't had a good deal, right? They've been as far as their relation to the U.S. government is concerned, and that should be investigated. But it's a complex issue. But the one thing I will say is that I don't think it's an example of communism, and that's something I can be certain of without knowing much else.
You got it. And this one coming in from Creo Debunk says, Hake, have you heard about cybernetic economy? Any objection to that? And I don't even know what. Can you tell us what it is?
You're saying it's a centrist term, but I don't think so, because when it was invented or coined, I'm not even sure when. It was a very leftist idea. Other than, I don't know. I guess you've kind of got a point. It is sort of a central way to place yourself, but I am definitely not a centrist libertarian by any means. I am very on the left. I believe everyone has the right to do whatever they want as long as it hurts no one else.
Hake, if you know what it is.
I cannot. Cybernetic or kybernetic
They
economy?
they put it with a K, kybernetic.
Oh,
Maybe they
interesting.
meant cybernetic. I don't know.
I don't know. If Haas knows the answers to these questions, he's welcome, but I don't know.
I think it means cybernetic, but I think it's a complex issue. So
Yeah. Did you know that other thing, the labor? He said
that's like a community meme. Just
Okay.
the guy I debated before.
Okay.
Yeah.
You got it. And Long Night's YouTube and longtime viewer, good to see you, says, how do we explain the government putting drugs in the street, creating the war on drugs, snatching the father out of the home, then acting like white people know how to solve our problems when you've created them? I think they said Hake at the end, so I think that's for you, Hake.
It's quite a question.
So I didn't put the drugs in their community. I didn't take the father out of their home. And honestly, the best thing for them,
your grandpappy
if the government
probably
was
did.
involved in that, I know the government did bribe them to have the father out of the home. That is a bribe, and I know that they made
That is some low-hanging
conditions
fruit.
tough or whatever for people in general to make a living nowadays or buy property. But the best thing for us, and I think this is addressing the communist that false imitation of logic, that false imitation of manhood, is responsibility. If blacks
Again, he goes back to manhood being the only thing that can do anything. He's ridiculous. Femininity does not mean that you just sit there and bitch about shit and never do anything all day. This guy's a complete husk of a person.
if the black community who surrendered their fathers took responsibility for that rather than continue to blame the government, which is evil and it is against them and us and everybody, then they would be doing much better. And I think that's why I'm concerned about whites and white anger and the appeal of this version of communism that's not so anti-white is appealing to that anger, which is the lie that you have a right to be angry and to blame, when you're better off just taking responsibility, and then will have the
I
strength
agree,
to fight back
Ornithine.
in the right way, and you'll have the
Just
wisdom
let it
too.
go. Just let
Well,
go.
Go ahead.
I don't think I think black people are taking responsibility, but they're also trying to point out that they don't want people outside their community to try and force things on them, right? So I think that's part of it, right? It's part of having your own self-determination.
I don't know what you mean by people outside their community forcing things on them.
Well, I think black people know what's best for themselves, right? They know the best answers to their own.
If they
They know
did,
the
would they
best.
be voting 96, 98% for Democrats?
Why does he have to make that a
Voter
racist statement?
turnout is very low.
I know, but would they be doing that if they did?
I can't speak on behalf of them. I'm not myself black, and I wouldn't.
But you can see.
We've got a fresh one coming
Anyway.
in. This one coming in.
Amazing.
Well done, moderator.
Annihilation
He really made that a race thing.
Prism
I'm not even
says,
digging into it.
For Hake, Lenin praised Washington's 1776 and Lincoln's anti-slavery crusade in the Civil War as revolutionary in his letter to the American workers. What is your response to that?
It's a red flag. I think there's a lot of melodrama about slavery and this pretense that they make it sound worse than it really was. I think there's much worse evil today. I think the Democrats today are much more evil than
Oh my god! Oh my god! They made slavery sound worse than it was, is your argument? Being someone's bitch for your whole life for no pay, for nothing but... Oh my god. Let's listen to that again. Jesus Christ.
a red flag. I think there's a lot of melodrama about slavery and this pretense that they make it sound worse than it really was. I think there's much worse evil today. I think the Democrats today are much more evil than the Democrats who owned the slaves. And
What?
the 1776 thing.
What? There's much more evil things than slavery? Slavery still exists, dude. Have you heard of human trafficking? And no one ever made it seem like it was worse than it was, because it's literally one of the worst states of living. You cannot be in worse living conditions in most cases. This dude is the worst person I've ever seen on this show. And I've watched T Jump, okay?
It's nice. It's a nice sentiment. I get that they want to latch on and support the revolution, but I think
That
our
was fucking
revolution,
nuts.
as far as my impression, was more righteous and based in God and nature and nature's God, right? Whereas the communists are
Holy
atheists.
shit.
You got it. And that is it for questions. We do want to say, folks, our guests are linked in the description. We really do appreciate these guys. The debaters are the lifeblood of the channel, so you can find their links.
Well, and
down
I
below.
think. Come on,
He
we
just
can't.
cut off the moderator.
Most Americans
He just cut off the
understand
moderator.
that slavery is probably the biggest historical evil in this country. I think. I mean, look, we can't say. I mean, you understand slavery is a great historical evil, right?
I don't know. There were decent and indecent slave owners. And
Yeah,
it's not ideal. It's not ideal to have slavery, but it's not ideal what we have today. And we have actual like mass killings of babies in the
look.
womb.
I think on this point, that's just a red line that I don't think I could ever come to an agreement with you. Like that, I think that is way beyond the realm of conceivability for even just normal Americans. Like like slavery is its evil was so unprecedented in the history of humanity.
At least someone agrees.
Like,
are you serious?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And
Oh man,
he's laughing about
yeah,
it?
that is.
I mean, it was a reality of all of
What
history.
happened? He just laughed about it?
No, the slavery that existed in the United States.
He's laughing off slavery being one of the worst things about human history. He just laughs it off like, oh, whatever, I'm here and I'm white, why does it matter? Derpy derp.
States was qualitatively different than historical slavery because
we treated them
it was
quite
a
well.
modern form of slavery where slave owners were able to do whatever they wanted. There was no like,
we made them Christians.
In the past, slavery merely referred to a relation of power that existed before ambiguous.
Is
Right?
afraid of us
in the
now.
Islamic world, slaves were able to actually take power, right? So it was an ambiguous thing.
Slaves were castrated in the Islamic world.
That's just coming left field, right? It's just left field to talk about
We still castrate
to try and
people.
downplay the crime.
Women are still castrated all over the world. Almost all Christian boys are still circumcised, which I view as a form of castration.
Times of American slavery. We fought a civil war to eliminate that evil from the face of this country.
You did not.
Millions died in that war, and I think it is fundamentally anti-patriotic to try and downplay the historical evil of slavery.
Well, part of that is an attack on the South. The beautiful South is more Christian, more down to earth, more decent, honestly, to the Black community than anybody else in America.
Look, regardless of the South today, we did fight a civil war to eliminate slavery and to
They did.
To downplay the historical evil of slavery is a form of treason, in my view, against the very basis of this country.
Okay.
Right?
Well, honestly, they were not treasonous when they fought against the North. They had legitimate grievances.
We can't.
I don't know
we don't
about
have time to get
treason,
into a debate about the question of the Civil War, but
It's
I do
definitely
find it
questionable.
extremely appalling and inhuman to speak about slavery in this way. Because
I think it's
you will
inhuman.
you will never be able to come to a common understanding or a common point of unity with the various different peoples in this country if you try to.
How can you call yourself a socialist and be such a dick to everyone?
To downplay the historical evils and injustices.
I'm telling the reality of it.
The Black community. No, I think
And no, actually, you're the one who can get the fuck out. You don't tell people to get the fuck out of my chat. Fuck off. I'm gonna time you out for I don't know how long. Never timed out anyone. Oh, did you delete it? Oh, I deleted it. Oh, 600 seconds. There,
I
you
don't
got
even think
10
you
minutes to
adequately
think about your
represent
shit.
the Trump's own movement when you say this. I think even Trump's movement can admit the extreme
He
historical
already
evil
whispered
that
me.
is slavery, and to stoop to such a
I'm not
low
reading
level
that shit.
so as to try
That's
and
a
downplay
performance.
that and insult the black people and citizens of this country, I think that is
I'm
fundamentally
sorry.
appalling.
They already
Blacks
whispered
should be
me.
grateful
I'm not going to assume that their 20-foot dong makes them a man.
to be in this country. They should be grateful for that by way of slavery.
No, that's
curious
just
what
what
he
you're
whispered
saying
me?
is just a bunch of nonsense.
No,
You're
No,
speaking a bunch
what you're
of
saying is
right now.
nonsense.
No, no,
They can go get triggered and think about it in timeout.
You're
It's
saying
okay.
no, you're
is keeping
speaking
them
a bunch
angry.
of nonsense right now. Black people fundamentally played an instrumental part in
No.
building this country. You're
Nope.
talking about they should be great. That's complete nonsense.
They should be grateful.
No,
Should they
no,
not be
You're
grateful to be
speaking-
here
you're
now?
speaking a bunch of nonsense right now.
No,
speaking
you're.
a bunch
This
of nonsense
is
right now.
communism. This is
And by
communism.
saying
He's been
this,
speaking
actually by
bullshit.
saying this, you're serving the current establishment because you're
Nope.
trying to sow
Purple hearts.
unneeded and unnecessary racial division by saying
this is
something
reality.
so anti-human and inhumane.
No,
Yeah.
you people support abortion. Give me a
You
break.
people.
We're not talking about
You people. We all support abortion, okay? No questions asked. All of us support abortion. Fuck you.
abortion right
It's-
now. We're talking
that's
about
much worse.
we're
That's
talking-
much worse, and
we're
it's
not
happening
talking
He's
today.
about the
whispering
fact
you guys.
It's happening
that your
today.
insult against the black people
No.
of this country
You're the one
Fucking
insulting
sad.
them. You're treating them like
So
children.
sad.
incompatible with
Just
any
please ignore
pretense
it.
that you want to see
Please
past
ignore
the
it.
divisions and get to a point of unity. You know,
You're
like,
treating blacks like children. You should be ashamed of yourself. It's
Sorry?
pathetic.
What
You
did
think
you
like
say?
you think like a female. You're treating the blacks
Okay, you're speaking about thinking like a female.
like a woman.
I can't think of
And to be clear, I didn't time you out for being on the right or anything. I haven't read your shit. I didn't time you out for your beliefs. I timed you out because you told someone to get the fuck out of my chat. Fuck you.
anything more fucking cowardly than trying to downplay the historical evil of slavery. It's either that you're ignorant and you don't understand
No,
that,
that's just
or you
melodrama.
are being deliberate.
Did he say it again, Bree? Did they say think like a female again? I missed it.
The
Okay,
blacks
you're speaking about
The blacks.
thinking like a female.
like a woman.
I can't think of anything more fucking cowardly than trying to downplay the historical evil of slavery. It's either that
How
you're
did I go
ignorant
back
and
that
you don't
far?
understand
No,
that,
that's just
or you
melodrama.
are being deliberately malicious.
No,
To
you
try and
have to
downplay
use
that
you
is
have to
a
use the
fundamental
misery. You have to
form
use
of
the
historical
anger.
revision.
You have to use the false anger about something long past in
Listen,
order to keep
I-
in order to
I-
prop
listen,
up your
listen,
communism.
You are
So-
saying
So how about we use his argument against him? How about we say, what if capitalism were under a more feminine mindset? Huh? What if we weren't going around killing everyone all the time? Would that do anything? This guy's a
unspeakably
moron.
evil things. If you,
No.
if
There
someone
is
was,
no
if
female
someone was
mindset.
advocating in favor of pedophilia,
We're all
would you not
morons.
be angry?
It's
We're
long
all
over.
different.
What if someone was defending pedophilia? Wouldn't
People
that make
do it
you
all-
a little bit angry?
They do it all the time. They do it all the time.
Okay, but
It's par
human
for the course.
beings should be angry when people say unspeakably evil.
No,
things.
you fight evil.
Yeah,
You
that
fight
is-
evil,
that
but you
is-
don't be
That
angry.
is fundamentally an evil thing you're saying.
No, it's
right?
not.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Slavery was one of the greatest historical evils
How
in the
so?
history of humanity
How so?
because it was the modern
Can you name one thing more evil than slavery? Just anyone in the chat, can you?
form of slavery.
The only thing that comes to mind is genocide, but is that not a form of slavery?
It's literally in the name. People were reduced to objects. They didn't even have the minimal status of being
I
recognized
understand.
as human beings.
I understand. It's not ideal.
And the devastation that this has
Yeah,
caused to the
genocide,
black
but yeah,
community
it's pretty
and the
much the same
scars of
thing
this
because
evil.
you're forcing people to do what you want them to do, which in genocide's case is die. But a slave owner is just as likely, or just as empowered to make all their slaves go die. The only difference is they lose all that late slave labor.
To
Oh,
this
gosh.
very day.
Not true. That's a
Yes,
lie. That's a lie.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
The
And you
only
talk
scars.
about You
The
talk
only
about,
scars are the
you
anger
talk
that you
about
keep
issues facing
alive.
the black family. What
Yeah.
event in history could
What?
be more catastrophic for building the
Oh, he didn't
foundation
let
of
him
a family
finish.
than something like slavery?
Slavery, they had their families more than today. And they had their
What?
families after slavery more than today.
which-
What?
You are,
It was the
you are
60s, the
speaking
70s.
nonsense right now.
Because families, slavery good? That is not an argument.
No,
The
that's real. Look
crimes
it up.
and infamous cruelty of the
No,
slave
you're ignorant
owners.
right here.
Listen, we fought a civil war to
You did not.
eliminate this evil.
You did not.
forever.
Stop saying we.
We did. I am an American. I was
I know,
born
but
in this
you-
country.
but
I'm
you-
just as much of an American as you are, and
No,
I am
you
an
are
American
anti-American.
This
citizen.
guy is
So yes,
so
You're feeling sorry for the
bad.
blacks.
We did fight that.
He's making infrared look good right now.
You're feeling sorry for people long dead. They're
I am not feeling sorry.
Yes,
I am
you are.
fulfilling my patriotic duty
No,
of
man.
honoring the tradition and history of this country to fight and eliminate from the face of the earth the widely recognized historical evil of this country. That is all I'm doing.
You didn't even explain how it's evil.
I didn't explain how it's evil that we say all men and women, all men are born equal, and yet some people live in chains and are reduced. They're attempted to reduce to the status of cattle and animals.
At least this
I
dude's
think it's
passionate about
self-evident
slavery.
way
We
in
made them
which,
Christians.
He's
We,
being based about it. For
they were
sure.
There is
happier than-
nothing,
Imagine
nothing
coming off
Christian about the
worse in this-
institution
I
of
know.
slavery. It's a mimicry
It's
of
not-
the
it's not-
pagan form.
It's
the
irrelevant.
pagan form of Roman slavery. The Confederates were among the leaders of the Confederates were among the debauched, depraved, and decadent elites in history.
Some of
They
them
had
were
nothing to do with Christianity.
they were more
whatsoever.
honorable than you or me.
Secretly, there you had the elements of paganism and complete anti-Christianity among them. This has nothing to do with Christianity whatsoever. The
Paganism
most
is
fervent
based, by the way.
Christian
Christianity was born from paganism, by the way. And then the Christians burned all the pagans. I wonder how that made them feel. Pretty shitty, I imagine.
at the time were fighting to free their fellow man from the bondage of slavery. John
Blacks in
Brown was
A terrorist.
fundamentally religious to
terrorist.
the core. He was
He was
absolutely
an angry
more
terrorist.
Christian.
John Brown was an angry terrorist and a murderer. Is the slavery in Africa?
I
you
do
call
not
John
believe in
Brown a
violence, but
terrorist and a
James
murderer,
Hake, yeah, he sure seems pro-slavery. He actually is pro-slavery, Jace.
And meanwhile, the Union Army
Did you hear
was
that
singing
tape?
This
It
is
was
communism.
insane.
By any means necessary. Just anger and lies
Listen,
and murder.
human beings
He
have the
just
right to
throws
be
out
angry
words.
about
No, they do not.
fundamentally unjust things.
Not true.
Yeah,
My preacher said that my daddy said that slavery was okay because we would be poor and there would be bad things without slavery.
No, they don't have the right to be angry. Were the
Yes,
blacks
they
blacks
absolutely
enslaved
do.
in
They absolutely
Africa?
do.
Is that evil?
they absolutely do. And you are playing into the tropes of the media that all conservatives are racist, which I do not fundamentally believe. Because
You
it's
think
not
I'm
true.
racist?
I think it is fundamentally racist to try and downplay the historical evil
Yes.
of
You're very
slavery, and you are
racist.
particularly insulting the black community
No.
to such an extent that no possible inroads or alliance or reaching out is possible.
For the past couple hundred years, almost exclusively black people have been slaves. Of course, they're going to take it personally. Just because white people have been slaves too doesn't mean it's good. Slavery is never a good thing. Free labor is bad, especially when you're forcing people to do it.
Possible between you
All
and
Blacks,
black
conservatives
blacks
are
calling into
racist.
my show
That's a
every
little
day agreeing with
generalized,
me.
but I
They're not as-
understand your
as
sentiments.
soft-hearted as you
If
think.
you were to say that
JSK.
slavery was not that bad, I do not think you would have people believe.
Why do you need it to be so bad?
It's not that I need it to be bad.
It just
it
is.
a matter of historical record that it was a fundamental
I'm
evil.
gonna go
It's
talk to you later.
inscribed
Peace out, Bree.
into the very basis of
Thanks
our
for
country
following.
as from the
And
Civil
don't
War.
forget
The
to hit
Civil
that
War
bell to
wasn't
know
when I
about
go live.
nothing.
In order to ignore
Hope
the
you have a great
present
day.
day evils that we have going on right now. It's
Keep
insane.
coming back,
you
I'll make you a
honestly
moderator
sound
too,
more
'cause
like a Democrat right now
We seem to be on the
Uh-huh.
than
same
anything
page.
else. For you to apologize for slavery,
I'm not a
which the Democrats also
you mean
did
defending it?
at the time, is just fundamentally appalling and revolting. in my
Are
opinion.
Democrats not worse today than during slavery? Therefore, killing the
They are
babies
not
in the womb.
worse today. listen, there is no need to lie about the historical
He
record
was just
and
going to
change
compare
things to such
abortion
an
to
extent.
slavery. And Infrared cut him off. He was just about to make a slavery abortion argument. Killing the babies in the womb is worse than slavery? But what about when that baby is born and then you turn it into a slave? Is that then okay? This dude, this James guy, James Hake, can go suck a cock. Ah,
In this way.
sorry,
If
that was
anything,
cringe.
are you
I'm
kidding
just
me? Have you
fucking
seen the
mad at
people
him.
making a melodrama about slavery? Every slavery movie, the 1619 Project, just outright lies
Yeah,
about
and
how
the way
bad slavery was. Give me a
you
break.
combat the lies of the 1619 Project is not to deny
People
the
lie about
historical evil
everything.
of slavery, but to recognize that it was
Some
the
people are
intention of the
liars.
founding fathers
I
from
don't
the
know how to
outset
fix
to
that, but I wish
eliminate
I
this
could.
evil, and the Civil War was the manifestation of this inevitable historical mission. A historical mission I would call a holy mission, even.
I think that it's just that just as you can't recognize good, you can't properly recognize evil. So
Well,
I think
we
that
are
that's.
not going to be.
I
able
think you're
to
getting
agree.
emotional
We are
about it.
not. We are
I
not.
feel like a
going
lot
to
of
be
the
able
time,
to agree
actually,
upon
you
this
No, I
can.
know, I understand that,
whatsoever.
but your argument is emotional,
Well,
truly.
it's not simply emotional.
And communism is slavery.
Listen, you have said something
No,
fundamentally appalling
not
and
inherently.
anti-human.
Only if
That's
it's
all I can
turned
say.
No,
into
it's not
slavery.
Abortion is anti-human, and the Democrats today support
Listen,
it.
there is no need. There is no need to
Address that.
insult.
Address
There's no need
abortion.
to insult an entire group of people by trying
He's
to
really
downplay
pushing
the
this
historical
abortion
evil
thing.
of slavery.
He thinks
They
he's.
don't. The
he
last
thinks
thing
it's
they
his
need is
only
people
good
feeling
argument.
sorry for them and pretending that it
Really
was so
sad.
bad.
We
They
are talking
did not even
about
experience
a
it.
very normal.
My body,
I
my
don't
choice.
think American conservatives
how I feel
agree
about
with you.
that.
We're talking about
I don't
a
think
very
they-
normal baseline,
And that's why they lose.
No,
That's why American conservatives are losing.
You are beyond the threshold of sanity.
No, man.
We've got a few more questions that just came
All right.
in. This one from Chris Morlock says, how can James Hake claim to be a Christian when he cannot see evil is slavery?
This is a great question. How are there so many people who claim to be Christian like this? You claim to follow a book that guides you to be a better person and then do terrible things.
Because slavery is not inherently evil. It's not ideal. You don't want it. If you can get your freedom, you should do so. I suppose.
Slavery is not inherently evil? The only way it's not evil is if it's not slavery. If you have some sort of agreement and agree that it's no longer slavery, that's the only way that's the only way it can be moral. So therefore, slavery is inherently bad.
I'm happy. I don't know if I'm happy about the way it went down. I hear a lot of things about that stuff, but evil is real, and evil is more subtle than these people realize.
Long Night's YouTube and says, as a black man,
Evil can be
thank
very
you,
subtle.
Infrared.
It can even hide behind the book of God, wouldn't you agree?
Simp.
Shaggy Boy says, y'all read Streamlabs? We don't have Streamlabs. It kept crashing on us. Amazing. But based on
I
it says,
don't use Streamlabs.
Hey,
it never works for me.
how is an economic system that encourages greed and envy more Christian than one that promotes equality and helping your fellow man?
That's what communism is. It's based on envy. It's based on covetousness. It's based on jealousy and anger and a false sense of justice, that playing God when you're not God
This
and you
dude
think like a woman.
kind of thinks.
How
Oh! And kind of think like a woman. And kind of think like a woman. Oh man, I need to get a new wireless keyboard.
We don't have Streamlabs. It kept
What?
crashing on us. Amazing.
What?
But based on it says, hey,
Kind of think like a woman.
how is an economic system that encourages greed and envy more Christian than one that promotes equality and helping your fellow man?
Again,
That's
how do you see yourself as a
what
Christian?
communism is. It's based on envy. It's
And then he just pivots saying, that's not Christianity, that's communism.
based on covetousness. It's based on jealousy and anger.
Based on all these sinful emotions.
and a
which
false
are completely natural.
sense of justice, that playing God when you're not God,
Playing God when you're not
and you
God,
think like a woman.
and you think like a woman. Being a communist means you think like a woman. Therefore, all women are communists. What a fucking moron. This dude could probably learn a thing or two by reading the Bible, for fuck's sake. I doubt he's ever read it in his life. By the way, I have read it, and that's a lot of the reason I don't buy into that shit.
How does it feel to think like a woman?
I told you that's going to get us in trouble with.
Oh,
Twitch
yeah.
terms of
Sorry, my
service.
bad. How does
Hey,
it think?
Stalinist says, Hank, how? We got that one. Chris Morlock says, Hank or Hake, does the Bible not say in Exodus 21:16, quote, "Whoever steals a man and sells him, and anyone found in possession of him shall be put to death"?
I think that was talking about fellow
Nice.
Israelites. Even the Black Hebrew Israelites themselves, whom I talk to, they're pro-slavery. They just don't want to enslave one another.
So it's okay if some people are
Yeah,
slaves
I think
but
there
not
might be one
others.
more.
Racism.
This one coming in
Gotcha.
from Hitch Wagster says, Haas, aren't you framing slavery as a
He really
past
cannot
evil
help
and ignoring
himself.
all the
It's
slavery
sad
that we still
and
have
crazy.
today?
No,
Guys, please
my
follow me
position is
if you're
crystal clear.
watching
All
and you
I'm
aren't
doing
following.
is doing the
I'm
baseline
definitely going to do more
recognition
of these
that slavery was an
breakdowns of
utmost historical evil
political
that
discussions.
should not be apologized for, downplayed, or there should be no revisionism of this fact. We should recognize this baseline fact. We fought a war that tore this country apart on the basis of the recognition of this fact. It's as simple as that.
In Islamic countries, they
All right,
were
Ornithine,
castrated.
we'll catch
In
you
African
soon.
countries, they're enslaved
When
to
this
this
is
day.
done, we're going to move
I don't think
over
that.
to...
I think you're downplaying the worldwide evil.
I just want to
and
look
I
at
don't
what
upplaying the
actually
evil
downplay. I'm
passed
not
of America.
downplaying
in the new infrastructure bill. So if you come back in like
any
half hour, I'll be doing that. But good luck with your day.
instance
Thanks
or
for
evil
stopping
of
by.
slavery whatsoever. But I'm just recognizing the qualitatively distinct and distinctly evil nature of slavery on the American continent, specifically leading up to the Civil War.
How old are you?
25.
Yeah, see, that's why you're brainwashed in this way. I'm 40. When I was in school, we learned that there were good and bad slave owners.
Fuck you, dude. Oh, you're 25 and I'm 40, so I'm just wiser because I have 15 years on you, and even though all experiences are different, like my experience gave me the right knowledge to know that I'm better than you.
Listen, I think
And that's
this
just
view, this
common
view
sense.
is fundamentally
Common sense says so.
This view is fundamentally incompatible
With communism,
This is like saying there can be a good and bad rapist.
there's nothing about slavery that's rape.
Yes, there certainly is, actually.
Nope,
yes,
not true.
there is.
Nope.
Actually, there fundamentally is, and it's a matter of historical record and
No,
widely documented.
I recognize that there may have been rapes that took place, but that's rape. Rape is wrong. Slavery is not ideal, but it's not
the
rape.
two were fundamentally intertwined with one and another.
You're making that claim, but again, there were
no. It is a matter.
Slave owners
it's a
raped
matter
their
of historical
slaves,
fact.
and they
So
let their
every
friends
slave
rape their
owner
slaves out of
committed a rape against
common
every
courtesy.
slave.
Like giving
Listen,
someone a
the
drink
two-
when they come to your house. Oh, would you like to fuck my slave while you're here? Enjoy whichever one you like, except for the one that I'm fucking.
Two were fundamentally intertwined as a phenomenon.
You're making it
Okay,
clear
we
as
are
mud.
speaking nonsense. Let's continue to move
Clear
on.
as mud. Just muddying the waters.
This question coming in from Steve, who says, I could be wrong, maybe I misheard him, but did James Hake say that slaves were, quote, treated well?
They were treated well. Many were treated well. They were
Few
raised Christian.
were treated well.
Some were even taught to read, which reading was not widespread even among whites. So overall, we treated them quite well compared to many other cultures.
This one coming in from Adam Albilia. Good to see you, longtime viewer. Says, Infrared, it seems like what Hake is trying to say is that, quote, you haven't demonstrated how enslaving people is evil.
Yep.
I think it's a matter of, it's a self-evident and absurd It's
You
the
cannot
reason why
own
is
another
just
being.
self-evident. If we have to get to a point where we have to debate about why slavery is fundamentally evil,
Slavery is
then
so evil, I think
everything
it's evil
else
to own
becomes up to
pets.
debate too, right?
Yeah.
And I don't want to arrive at a situation where we have to start debating about things like pedophilia and things we know intuitively and inherently to be wrong.
God is self-evident, but you're relying on your feelings.
God is
You're
not
lost about that.
self-evident. God has never evidenced himself to me, or really to anyone I know, because God is a lie made to control your mind.
Um, like I said, there are lines we should not cross as human beings, as a matter of basic human decency
This
and
one,
humanity.
sorry.
Freedom
This
of
one coming in
speech.
from Hakeem says, Hake, how do you react to the British deep state's attempt to assassinate Lincoln by supporting unpatriotic John Wilkes Booth and the Confederacy? Also, shout out to Infrared and RTSG.
I don't know much about that, but it sounds like it was evil fighting against maybe evil. I don't know whether Abraham Lincoln was good or evil because you can't trust any history nowadays, much less the mainstream media present day.
You got it. And with that, do want to remind you our guests are linked to the description, folks. It has been a lively one to be sure. And
To be
we
sure.
are excited for this other
Okay.
lively one that I had mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
in the
Okay, it's
stream, as
done.
We have confirmed it just a couple weeks ago.
I'm going to-
Destiny and Stefan
I'm
Molyneux.
Gonna pause now. Oh wow. I'm gonna take a short break, and I'll be right back. And we're gonna go over the infrastructure bill, or at least what little bit of it passed. But I'll be right back.